The House by Tanya Eby. Performed by Rhett Samuel Price. The body is not the only vessel for a spirit. Sometimes we like to choose other frames to hold our souls. Trees, animals, sometimes a home. This was an old house, but not older than me. I watched it being built, the wood hewn and split and smoothed, joined together, the foundation laid, the walls erected. It was a good house, a solid house, a house with no soul. But that could change if the right events happened. I watched from afar, curious but not yet excited. After many years, I noticed changes to the home. The foundation sunk, and so the house was no longer stable and even. When people walked within, they were a little off balance, and they became anxious. Their anxiety tasted sweet to me, like ripe cherries. I licked my lips. The house began to age. Cracks grew, wood softened, and with every angry thought and deed of the dwellers within the home, the house soaked in the darkness, making space for me. I slipped in quietly. There was so little room at first within the walls, and it was a tight fit. But then I began to feed on the anger and the hate and the anxiety of the occupants, and I began to grow, forcing my way through the very fiber of the wood. I pushed my way through the walls of the home until I became not just one with the house, but I became the house itself. And I was hungry. Darkness fed me, and fear, oh, fear was the tastiest of treats. But how could I get more? How could I cause the occupants of my rooms to sweat, for their hearts to beat faster, for adrenaline to course through their blood so I could lap it up like a cat laps cream? I found that I could move things. First it was just small things. I could cause a wind to blow through a room for a moment. I scared a small girl, and she cried for her mother, and I sipped the fear down. Then I became stronger. I could open and close cabinets. I could take control of insects and send them hurtling against windows until they clicked and clicked and clicked. I could drag a chair across the wood floor. I could bend the walls and floors so that the boys and girls, the mother and father, could no longer walk in an even line. Later I would draw breath and hover above them while they slept, my breath hot on their skin. They began to fight with one another. Anger is often fear in disguise, and anger tastes warm and salty. I licked my lips. I was tucked into every nook and cranny of the house, but I wanted more, and so I reached out with just a small tendril, and I found I could crawl inside the man. I could tickle his brain, cause his arm to rise and fall, his feet to stomp. I could control his vocal cords and make him say terrible things. I found I could mimic voices, and so I filled the dark and empty rooms with calls from children. And I lapped at the fear like cream. When the family could not take it anymore, they left me, and I was hollow for a while. And then a new family moved in, and I began to feast again, and again, and again. When the house became too tight for me, I sent out roots shooting through the dark, moist earth to reach out into other homes, to squirm inside the wood and plaster, to lie in wait, like a weed ready to sprout when the rains come. And I was so hungry waiting. I banged doors, I moaned, I called, I became shadows in hallways, dark stains on the floor and ceilings. I disappeared and withdrew sometimes just to keep the inhabitants off kilter. And I laughed at them like they were cream. There are those who believe in ghosts. Ghosts are real. I know this because I am one. I am all. I am the house on the hill at the end of the gravel drive. I am the house at the lake and in the city square. I am surrounded by woods and buildings, by water and air. I watch. I wait. And late at night, when the land is dark and shadows creep and grow, I am the house that is hungry and waiting for you.
She is by the Window, by Anthony Addis. Performed by Marnie Penning.
Jessica is by the window. The brooding portrait of a petty nobleman stands on the room's north wall behind her. She doesn't know the nobleman's name, because he died long before she was born. It is a grim, dark painting, depicting a glowering, lined face bathed in shadows, and a lean body clothed in gloomy garments. It is unfortunate that the painting is in this, her favourite room in the house, preferred even to her bedroom. The fireplace stands in the room's west wall, cold and empty, yet filled with happy memories. The mantelpiece is ornamented with lifeless china figures and dry, dead flowers in white vases. A heavy white rug lies on the floor before the fireplace. She remembers playing on the rug long ago, with the fire roaring and crackling behind her, casting light and heat throughout the room. Now, the room is dark, and everything is cold. Despite the passing of many years, the room hasn't changed since the days when she used to play by the fire. The velvet and mahogany chairs are in the same places that they have always been. She can just discern the silhouettes, for it is night, and very dark. Night's darkness has entered the room through the lead-panelled bay window. Outside, heavy, threatening clouds hang from the black sky. The road beyond the house is silent and empty. No cars drive by, and no one walks past the house along the pavement. There is no evidence to show that anyone in the world is alive. Everywhere is silent. The room, the house, the world outside the window. Silent. No wind or rain. Only the clouds banking thick and deadly overhead. Nothing stirs in the house. No one breathes, snores, walks or talks. No heartbeats to counter the night's intrusive, prevailing silence. She tries to imagine the house's sounds in daylight, but only succeeds in reawakening painful, bittersweet memories of the sounds she once made, playing on the rug, immersed in games only she played. She misses people, even after time has passed and the world had turned and turned and turned. She longs for her parents with a fierce, needful love that throbs and aches. Their love for her was a warm, protective cloak, but now it seems unimaginably distant. Her father was a powerful man. She was always dimly aware of the influence he held over other people, but sometimes he used to play with her on the rug in front of the fire, or tell her stories of fantastic lands and peoples. He is dead now, and has been for a long time. Her mother was beautiful, and dark-haired and caring, and she was always there. Jessica used to believe that her mother would still be there for her, even after her death. She'd been wrong. Her mother died shortly after her father, and with her died love, happiness, and hope. Jessica has never moved on from their deaths. Time stopped in her parents' room, with her mother lying under her bed covers, pale, beautiful, and dead. After all this time, Jessica's loneliness has burrowed deep within, and is now part of her. She is apart from humanity and life, alone, except for that all-too-brief beginning, when she was cloaked by her parents' love and presence. She has always been alone. She often comes to stand by this window, to look out at the world and attempt to feel like she is part of the world. Sometimes she yearns to venture outside, but she never will, because although her existence is lonely and cold, it is all she is capable of. Intending to go to another room, she moves from the window, but hesitates when she hears a noise. Someone is walking on the pavement outside. She drifts back to the window, waiting and watching. It is a young man, tall, with short dark hair. He is wearing casual clothes, and he is walking slowly, as though he is savoring the night's serenity. He hasn't seen her yet. She hopes that he won't notice her at all, but makes no effort to draw back from the window. Fascinated by this living, breathing person, she stares at him as he walks closer until he is alongside the house. Perhaps sensing her watching eyes, he turns his head toward the window, and she realizes that he has seen a beautiful, empty house, dark in the night, with no lights on. Moonlight glints on a big bay window, where a 9 or 10-year-old girl is standing. Her straight blonde hair reaches to the small of her back. Freckles run across the bridge of her nose. She is wearing a pale white nightgown, with laces tied across the front and shoulders. The nightgown's cuffs at her wrists are pleated and flared. The little girl stares at him, with such a longing expression, his heart aches with sorrow. Behind her, he can see a dark, plain wall. The child is only 10 yards from him at the most. She stretches a curled hand out to touch the window with her fingertips, drawing them down the glass in straight parallel lines. Unnerved, he increases the length of his stride. Once he is past, he wonders if he really saw her. For it is late, and no child should be up at this time. Alone, and standing by the window, in the dark of a desolate house.
The Rabbit Hole by Jack Sorin, performed by Hilary Huber. The blistering summer sun boils the air around us, as it usually does round about noon on an overhumidified, cloudless day. I can't even hear the cicadas anymore. The creatures apparently all screamed out. Perhaps they have succumbed to the heat's hidden poison. Or maybe it's just the roar of the undulating traffic on the other side of the field that's washing everything out beneath its unending waves. I don't know. I seem to remember days when a field full of waist-high, sun-bleached grass excited me. But that was so long ago, it doesn't even seem like a memory. More a story someone told me once. In truth, I've searched so many fields that they're all starting to meld into one. Even the lush green oaks that surround this one, oozing their peppery scent with unbridled generosity, leave me cold. The days when I used to nestle down out of sight in the privacy of long waving blades with boys bubbling with passion, almost too eager to bear me to Mother Earth, are long gone. Even those memories are as intangible and distant as the hazy exhaust fumes hanging on the edge of the field that opens up onto the highway. But I shouldn't be letting my mind wander. I should be concentrating, analyzing my strokes. I should be waiting for the plunging of the broomstick in my hand to hit more than thatch and dirt. Waiting for the fervently desired, yet frantically abhorred hiss of a heat-bloated target finally bullseyed. The others, there's about 15 of us today, less than half the complement of a week ago, seem able to hold their concentration unwaveringly as they weave this way and that, piercing the cover with everything from hockey sticks to dead branches, their faces contorting whenever they mistake a knoll for their quarry. And I should at least be as focused as they are. About a half an hour after redoubling my efforts, I come up beside a young police officer who has the visage of a man who is stirring muffin batter, his stick plunging in rapid, shallow stabs, but not making the side-to-side motions that the police themselves showed us. As I approach, he gives a weak smile, and I can tell immediately it is not the comradic smile of someone who is about to have an exchange with another involved in the same heroic endeavor, but the hormone-controlled lip curl of a man about to deal up his best banter for a member of the opposite sex. Even so, I continue to approach, somehow drawn to him. "Hot one, huh?" he offers. I think if this is his best, then I have nothing to worry about. At the same time, strangely recognizing the officer's face. No, not his face, but I sigh in defeat. So much flees my mind's grasp now. Memories like smoke in a Santa Ana wind. "Yes, never fails," he says, the motion of his stick slowing as he switches his concentration from his wrist to his mouth, and perhaps elsewhere too. "During the week, you fry. On the weekend, it rains, you know?" I nod. He reacts to my silence, his attention haphazardly returning to his job, and he heads across the field, looking as if he might have thought of a few things to say, but the heat and my silence precluding him sharing them. I shuffle along with him, just a few paces behind, somehow connected to him. The closeness of a human is something I desperately need right now, despite the risks. Like figure skaters, we move in unison as we cover most of the field that has been left to us. "You've been out here before, haven't you?" he says, abruptly ceasing his listless stabs and turning to face me. "I mean, I've seen you, haven't I?" He digs into his pocket, pulls out some cigarettes and offers the pack to me. I decline, the cravings in me doing flip-flops for the refusal. "Do you know if anything has turned up today? Anything at all?" I ask, trying not to plead. He lights his cigarette, inhales, and stares emotionally into the setting sun. I wonder if the dramatics are for me or him. Nope, nada. And if you ask me, he takes a drag in mid-sentence. We're not going to. I feel my heart flutter. Why not? Too much blood in the car, he answers, almost warily. By the sudden apprehensive look on his face, I can tell he's hoping I'm not a relative or a close friend. Besides, we've searched this field 3 times already. If you ask me, we're beating a dead horse. She's gone. But the older officer, the name fails me. Detective Higgins. He politely supplies in between drags. Yes, Detective Higgins told us that a field searched 5 times wouldn't have every single inch covered. Isn't that right? Well, yes and no. I cock my head in an attempt to urge him to finish his thought. It is true, but he partly says that to keep our asses out of the slings when we don't find anything. Pardon my French. But if it's true... He takes control of the conversation from me. Look around. There's maybe a dozen people here. Next week, if we look again next week, there'll be less than half that. People are losing interest. We're not going to find anything, even if there was something to find. The last he says, shaking his head and screwing the smoking butt into the grass with his boot heel. A strange confidence in his words. But we have to keep looking, I blurt a little too loudly. A few people look at us for a moment, but then Detective Higgins blows a whistle on the other side of the field, and the stabbers shoulder their tools and begin to head in. I horrifically realize it's over. Don't get me wrong, the young policeman says as he begins to walk backwards towards his detective. If it was up to me, I'd keep looking. Pete's handing out tickets. I stand quietly for a few moments, staring at the policeman and the departing searchers. I must look pitiful as the tug on my soul trebles. But words elude me. It's not up to me, he finally says with a shrug, turning around and walking briskly towards the crowd on the far side of the meadow. The broomstick slips through my hand and bounces with a quiet rustle into the wind-dancing blades at my feet. I try to pick it up, but I can't. I give up and stand straight again. He's almost to the crowd. I'm alone in the grass, helpless. But you're a policeman. You have to help me. You have to. My propriety is slipping down the sucking rabbit hole with everything else. I know I'm here. You have to help me. It's your job. You have to find me. Then I recognize him. The familiarity of his broad shoulders, swaying pelvis, and blocky square head. Even without the mask, I can see him straddled over me, finished his thrusts, and now jabbing viciously with the gleaming blade. Something buzzes in the policeman's ear. He waves away the non-existent insect with a quick flick of his hand. He turns to call to the young woman, hoping to lure her out for one of his special drinks. But there is nothing behind him except the golden, swaying grass. Whispers seem to ride on the gusts that roller coaster across the field for a moment. But then they, too, are gone.
Geiststurm by M.K. Gibson. Performed by Kyle Tate. October 1965. Western Maryland. Reich-sanctioned hunting region. 1. Kneeling by the base of an old oak tree, Jonathan drew the bow until the string touched his cheek. The deer, a mother doe and 2 young ones, walked the trail. The mother would bring more meat, but the young ones would be easier to kill. The deer were over 40 yards away and slightly downhill of him. No. Slowly and silently, he eased the tension off the weapon. too difficult. With only 5 arrows left, he couldn't afford to take an iffy shot. A bent or broken arrow was one less chance to eat again. Jonathan breathed out in frustration. He had to be patient. He needed an instant kill. Tracking a wounded animal took time. Time neither he or his mother had. He gave a quick glance upward at the brewing storm. Jonathan could feel the building pressure, the malevolence. He had to make a decision. Go for the kill, or get home to turn on the collectors. Don't be rash. Think. The small family continued down the trail. Their ears twitched, probing for predators. Based on the terrain and the game trail they were using, Jonathan guessed the deer were most likely moving towards the small nearby stream about a mile away. If he could get there ahead of them, then he would have a chance. Satisfied with the plan, Jonathan waited several minutes before moving back up the hill. If he cut through the field and over the mountainside, he could get ahead of them and work his way up the creek bed. The foliage and natural cover could be used as a hunter's blind. Breaching the forest line, amber waves of knee-high wild grass rippled in the cool breeze. High above, standing like silent guardians, the massive metal structures greeted Jonathan as they always did, with awe and curiosity. The towering, identical T-shaped monuments were spaced half a mile apart, spanning the length of the clearing and over the horizon line. Long black cables hung from the derelict towers. The bare gray steel girders always looked incomplete to Jonathan. His grandfather told them they used to conduct old-fashioned electricity, but that was long ago, before he was born. Back before the bombs were dropped. Back when America and the Allies had lost the war. Jonathan shook his head. The old war wasn't his concern. Eating was, and he had to cover a lot of distance in a short amount of time. Low, powerful thunder rumbled in the distance. The purple-black cloud head was beginning to form, rolling and churning. Hating. Hunting. He heard the whisper. Jonathan. No. He refused to acknowledge it. It was the wind and his hunger. Nothing more. It wasn't the voices. Please. God. Not now. Quickly, he unslung his backpack, dropping the heavy mass of canvas to the ground. Going by muscle memory more than conscious thought, his hands began assembling his spanner. Removing the leg fittings first and setting them aside, Jonathan pulled out the leather harness, unrolling the tangled mess of buckles, leather, braided power cords, and steel. Jonathan. The skin on the back of his neck prickled as he closed his eyes. Icy fear crackled down his spine and settled in his stomach. The voices. They always called to him. Always. His mother said the voices were a good thing. A warning. Jonathan forced his hands to finish assembling his spanner. Setting the leg fitting up, side by side, Jonathan strapped the harness around his legs, shoulders, and waist, and then slung the backpack with the power supply around his worn leather coat and buckled it tight. Pulling the braided power cord from the pack's lower retractable housing, he attached it to the regulator on his belt. He stepped into the leg fittings, locking his feet in place. The shocks and struts squeaked slightly. Mentally, he cursed himself for not oiling them earlier. He unwound the power cables from the legs and inserted them into the regulator. Looking down at the rectangular display on his belt buckle, the first diode flashed a constant amber, showing he had an initial charge. His hand moved towards the bottom of his backpack, but his hand hesitated on the ignition switch. Were the deer worth it? It was a huge risk. There would be other deer. Maybe he could forage for mushrooms and tubers again? The recent mid-fall cold snap had killed most of the berries in the area. What were left had been eaten by the local wildlife. He could go another day, maybe 2, without eating. But Mom couldn't. Damn it, she just couldn't. She'd eaten the last few crumbs of bread 2 days ago. The wind blew by, and he smelled the unmistakable scent of dead things on the air. He thumbed the safety lock open and pressed the ignition. Geist hummed, powering the spanner. The leg fittings rattled for a moment as the magna inverters under his feet hummed with a slight warble of power. Slowly, he levitated a few inches off the ground. Jonathan turned the dial on the flow regulator on the pack's left shoulder strap. He rose higher. Once Jonathan was 12 to 14 inches from the ground, he pushed off with his right leg, then planted his left leg down hard. The spanner propelled him forward in bounding, gravity-defying leaps through the field. With controlled movements and a swing of his arms to counterbalance his motion, Jonathan covered large swaths of open ground in only moments. His dad had told him that Geist made the impossible possible. His grandfather had said the cost wasn't worth it. All Jonathan knew was that harvesting Geist paid for things. But the recent lack of storms meant no pay. And without pay, there was no food. The Reich had no charity programs. Not for an independent farm, anyway. If you starved, it was your fault for inefficient planning. Upon your death, your farm would be given to a family who would plan better. Reaching the tree line, he dialed the flow regulator down to a lower setting and slalomed down the steep, forested mountain in wide, lazy arcs. Jonathan grabbed the occasional small tree to alter his course so he could leap a log or kick off a large rock. But for just a moment, he was a little kid again. When hunger and responsibility didn't plague him. When laughter wasn't a luxury. In that moment, he was just 15, playing in the woods. Like he used to before. Before his sister had been... Jonathan! The voice was so close, he thought he felt breath on his ear. Instinctively, he whipped his head to the side, looking for the source. Jonathan's right shin connected with a thick sapling. The impact spun him around. His left heel caught the ground and he tumbled out of control. His arms flailed uselessly, looking for purchase. No! Jonathan twisted hard, landing flat on his chest, with his right arm pinned under his body. The sudden impact knocked the wind out of him, and fiery pain blossomed from his wrist. Ow, he whispered through gritted teeth. He tried moving his fingers. They responded, but slowly. Nothing was broken, but he felt the heated, pulsing pain. Already his wrist was getting puffy. Not broken, but badly sprained. Pushing himself up with his left hand, Jonathan scanned the forest in every direction, looking and listening. He heard only the ambient sounds of the woods. He saw nothing. Standing, he checked the power regulator. It showed the amber light. He breathed a small relief, thankful that he had installed the gyroscopic kill switch. He checked the quiver on his hip, still counting 5 arrows, locked into place. Next, he pulled his bow off his back's maglock, inspecting it for damage. Seeing none, he held the weapon in his left hand and tried drawing it with his sprain. His arm began to tremble. He released the tension. He would need to be even closer to make a clean shot. Hungry. So hungry. He shut his eyes, blocking out the voice. The fear led to frustration. He was so tired. So tired of being afraid. So tired of being hungry. No, he said. Whether to himself or to the voice, the statement stood. No, you don't have time to be a child. You have a job to do. Do it. After his father had conscripted into the Reich, Jonathan was the man of the house. he had responsibilities. Like keeping your sister alive? He thought. No, the sickness took her. It wasn't his fault. He had to be a man. His mother needed him. His farm needed him. Jonathan powered on the spanner, returned the bow to the maglock, and continued down the mountainside towards the creek bed. 2. Creeping forward, Jonathan shifted his weight. His wrist throbbed, but he forced his mind to push the pain away. Nestled into the patch of overgrowth, he hoped that the damp, decomposing earthen forest would mask his scent. He had stowed the spanners and his pack under a log and covered it with leaves. He considered leaving the pack on, but the pack's buckles made too much noise. Jonathan checked where the game trail crossed the small creek. Seeing no fresh signs, he guessed that he'd made it ahead of the mother deer and her fawns. Any prey animal would move slowly and cautiously, especially a mother with her children. All he could do was to stay low, cover his scent, and wait. It was midday, no matter what the dark clouds above said. If he managed to make the kill, then he had a chance to get home before dark. He could almost smell the cooking venison and taste the juices. His stomach rumbled in anticipation. Not yet. The kill hasn't been made yet. Keep your head about you. With no cold compress for his sprain, Jonathan lay on his side in the makeshift camouflage, covering his wrist with wet, cold earth. It would help the swelling a little, but he didn't want his wrist numb either. Every few minutes or so, he removed the improvised compress and ran his fingers through a series of quick exercises. Was this everyone's life? He wondered. Waiting for food? Waiting to live? Waiting to die? Waiting to run? A small splash in the creek, followed by small rocks being overturned, brought him back to the moment. Slowly, as not to make any sudden movements, Jonathan saw the trio of deer approaching. Patience. Silently, Jonathan picked up the bow and prepared to draw. The deer walked cautiously, sampling the air, sniffing for danger. The babbling stream masked some sound as Jonathan slowly rose to his knee. He raised his weapon, trying to line the bow alongside a tree profile, mimicking the land. They were 15 yards away. If he waited any longer, they may smell him and bolt. The 3 deer took turns drinking from the stream. He had to make his decision. Kill the mother? She would bring more meat. Or kill one of the children. Leaving the mother alive would give her the chance to breed more. All 3 deer were turned slightly away. A proper shot behind the foreleg joint should pierce the heart. But which one? Suddenly, all the deer stopped and raised their heads, scanning. In that moment, he released his arrow. The shot flew true, striking the mother. The deer bleated once, its legs buckling as the body went into a state of shock and fear. The 2 fawns, confused and panicked, turned and ran back the way they came, abandoning their mother as she died. Jonathan quickly nocked another arrow and waited. Oftentimes, a dying animal had one last surge left in them. He held the bowstring drawn, the arrow ready. His hand burned in agony. Seconds passed, with no movement. Satisfied, Jonathan released the bow's tension, returned the arrow to his quiver, and stowed the bow on his back's maglock. Above, thunder rumbled. Lightning flashed angry, dark purple streaks, lighting up the canopy above. No time. Pulling his belt knife, he readied himself to field dress the animal. Jonathan gave a quick glance around to make sure he was alone, then sliced into the soft underbelly, cutting her open from her crotch to her sternum. Cutting through the breastbone, he opened the doe up, and began removing her organs. Finishing the dressing, Jonathan wiped the sweat from his brow, smearing a little of the animal's blood on his cheek and forehead. Now, he just had to get the spanner to help him drag the carcass back to the grove, where he'd left Blossom hitched. Sudden motion from up the hill caught his attention. With it, the smell of rotting meat. The two fawns were bounding back the trail towards him, fear in their glassy black eyes. A streak of dark blue and gray flashed as a humanoid creature burst through the underbrush. Rushing on all fours, the creature tackled one of the fawns. In a swift motion, the figure jerked the fawn's head to the side, snapping its neck. The creature screeched in triumph. "Oh, God," Jonathan mouthed. Another roar, and a second gray-blue streak exploded from the dense forest. Leaping through the air, the monstrosity landed atop the second fawn, bringing the broken branch it held in its hand down like a club over the fawn's head. The deer, dazed, fell to the forest floor. The creature fell on the fawn and bit into its neck with its broken human teeth. The dying fawn bleated in terror, struggling to survive. It didn't know its end was seconds away. With each wail from the deer, the creature bit deeper. Both of the dead men gulped down blood and meat with rapture. "Food!" the creature screamed. The Draugr violently tore into the fawns. Their grotesque, twisted bodies reeked of death, and their clothing was little more than rags. They were not freshly risen, and had grown in strength and ferocity. One of the dead looked up, blood and hair hanging from its mouth, as bloody spit dripped from its lips. It looked at Jonathan with milky white eyes. "More food," the creature said, with a slight upturn to its dead lips. "More food," the other agreed, dropping its kill. Jonathan's stomach dropped. He had stood there like a fool, frozen in fear. He'd seen Draugr before, but never this close. His feet turned to run. Then his conscious mind stopped his body's flight. The deer. The food. Without it, his mother had little chance of surviving. The dead men began advancing slowly, each picking up a thick, broken branch as a club. The stream. Grabbing the forelegs of the dead doe, Jonathan dug his heels into the damp, muddy earth, pulling the deer with him through the stream at his back. The Draugr roared in bestial fury and ran for him. Pure, cold adrenaline and fiery fear drove Jonathan. He pulled and pulled, crossing the narrow stream with his kill, mere inches before the dead men were on him. "No! Get you! Kill you! Eat you!" "Not today," Jonathan huffed. He never knew why, but the Draugr either could not or would not cross running water. It was why his father insisted on installing the underground cistern around the farm. The storm above let loose an incredible boom of thunder. "Found you, Jonathan," he heard the voice say. Jonathan clamped his hands to his ears, trying to block the voice out of his head. "Go away!" Eat you soon," the Draugr said together, over and over. "Shut up! Shut up! Shut up!" With sheer frustration, Jonathan pulled the deer 20 feet or so up the hill, trying to think of his next move. The Draugr did not give him the opportunity. Dropping their clubs, the dead began picking up nearby rocks and throwing them with incredible force. Jonathan rolled away as a rock slammed into the tree to his right. A second rock clipped his thigh, knocking his leg out from under him. Grunting in pain, Jonathan scurried on all fours, working his way up the hill, taking cover behind a large oak. "Come out! Come out!" one of the undead croaked. "Join us! Join us!" the other said. His back to a tree, Jonathan nocked an arrow, taking deep, calming breaths. He had to make them count. He had 4 arrows. There were 2 of them. Head. He had to hit their heads. Nothing else would do. I could run, he thought. Leave the deer and run. Hunt again another day. But, Mom. Jonathan pivoted around the tree, drawing back the bow as he did. Sighting the closer of the 2, he lined his sight and fired. The arrow whistled past the Draugur's head, missing him. Damn it. Jonathan pulled his head back behind the tree, just as one of the Draugur hurled a heavy rock at his skull. Rocks began to slam into the tree to his back. Over and over, hard, crashing thumps impacted against the tree. Each time the stone hit wood, he closed his eyes tighter. Each hit made him lower his head further. And for a flickering second, he wished he were already dead. A moment passed, and the thumping stopped. Knocking another arrow, Jonathan forced his eyes open. He forced himself to peek around the tree. The Draugur were lifting a fallen tree and were trying to slide it into the small creek. With a splash, they dropped the log, then went to retrieve another. Why? Draugur don't cross bridges. Oh no. Not a bridge. A dam. They were constructing a dam. If they succeeded, they'd cross and kill him. No, they won't, he told himself. Just get to the gear. Move. Jonathan took 3 deep breaths, stood, and ran back down the hill, away from the Draugur. When he was 40 yards away, the creatures turned and roared. Dropping the log with a heavy crash, the undead monsters tore off, giving chase. With their supernatural speed, they would be on him in seconds. Jonathan reached the spot where he left his gear. Pulling away the log and leaves, he opened his pack and pulled out a 12-inch cylindrical tube. With a flick of his wrist, the tube extended to nearly double in length. He fished out a small Geist capsule and screwed it into the base of the tube. Flicking the safety off, the blitz stick hummed with power as the tip glowed a bright blue-white. With the Draugur closing in, he slammed his feet into the spanner's leg harnesses. It took his shaking hands 3 tries to connect the power cords to the Geist power supply and flow regulator. The Draugur tore up ground, bounding on all 4s like angry gorillas. He activated the spanner's power, and the Geist flow hummed to life. The lead Draugur leaped as they drew closer. Jonathan dialed the Geist flow to high, pushing himself backward and jumping clear before the monsters reached him. The spanner absorbed his landing with an electromagnetic cushion as he awkwardly held the blitz stick in his left hand. The second Draugur lunged for him, swiping a clawed hand. Jonathan pushed to one side, dodging the attack, then lashed out with the blitz stick. The tip of the weapon connected with the dead man's right forearm. In a blast of bright light, the monster's arm blew apart, just below the elbow. The Draugur registered no pain and swiped with his other arm in response. The dead man's hardened nails tore through the front of Jonathan's leather coat, ripping his shirt, drawing blood, and knocking the blitz stick from his hand. Jonathan pushed off hard with the spanners, bounding up the hill once more. As the Draugur followed up the hill, Jonathan suddenly reversed course, the way he did when he played tag with his sister in the forest. Turning downhill, he sped past them, back to the bottom of the creek bed. The living dead, full of hate and hunger, followed. Jonathan pulled his bow from his back and nocked an arrow and took aim. The creatures came at him with murder in their dead eyes. Jonathan released the arrow. Once again, he missed, the arrow sailing wide. His heart ready to break, Jonathan knocked his second-to-last arrow. The Draugur were all but on top of him. He could smell the rotting stink of their dead bodies, mixed with the coppery blood of the deer. He drew back the bow and fired. As if guided by God, The missile struck the one-armed Draugr just above its left eye. The monster's head snapped back and fell to the ground, unmoving. But the second Draugr kept coming. The dead man barreled into Jonathan, knocking him to the ground, sending his bow flying into the forest. "Eat! Eat you now!" the creature growled from atop him. Jonathan twisted and struggled, but the dead man's grip was like iron. The monster's tongue lolled out like a dog, dripping drool on Jonathan's face. Leaning its head back slowly, the creature snapped forward, biting down towards Jonathan's face. Panic and fear fueled the young man's muscles. He pulled away hard, rolling his right shoulder and freeing his hand. The Draugr missed the young man's face, instead biting down hard onto Jonathan's right shoulder, its yellowed teeth tearing through the leather coat. "Ah!" Jonathan cried out. "Stop! Stop! Stop!" Suddenly, and without explanation, the Draugr obeyed. Both the living and the dead stared at each other in a split second of confusion. Jonathan took the moment to roll away, breaking the creature's grip. Getting his feet under him, he powered on the spanner. The Geist-powered rig propelled him forward, leaping through the forest. The undead shook off the momentary daze and scrambled after him. Jonathan ran, looking for the blitz stick. The glowing white tip stood out against the forest shadows. From behind, the Draugr closed, leaping high into the air. Jonathan dropped to his knees, slid across the dirt and rock, and grabbed the blitz stick. Turning, he thrust the weapon into the monster's maw. The Geist-powered weapon discharged its remaining charge with tremendous force, fracturing the monster's skull and killing it. The corpse fell atop Jonathan, but he only laughed and wept, for he heard the voice again. "Still hungry. Always hungry." 3. "Sorry, girl," Jonathan said to his horse. "Didn't mean to be gone so long." The chestnut mare flared her nostrils. "Yeah, I'll get cleaned up when we get back to the farm." Jonathan finished tying the bundle containing the semi-butchered deer across the front of Blossom's saddle. It was an extra 100 pounds or so of weight, but Blossom could manage it. Securing his gear in his pack, Jonathan put his foot into the stirrup and swung his leg over. "Let's go home, girl." Once Jonathan cleared the forested region and began his trek across the grassy rolling hills near his home, the wind began to howl. Thunder boomed overhead. The voices of the dead screamed for the world to hear. Looking up, Jonathan saw the storm front moving in fast. The purple-black thunderhead clouds rolled in low. Long flowing tendrils of clouds dangled, searching for the living. Tendrils of psychokinetic energy made manifest, an angry extension of the spirit storm's will and never-ending hunger. "Yeah, girl," Jonathan called out, kicking the mare in the flanks. Blossom took off, galloping across the open land. "Jonathan, come to us. Feed us." Jonathan did not want to look back. The faithful animal, sensing his dread, galloped harder and faster. Despite the waning autumn cold, both Blossom and Jonathan sweated from exertion and fear. Blossom chewed up the rough terrain as the cloudy tendrils of the storm reached lazily downward. Drifting on wind like the tentacles of a jellyfish, the storm wanted the flesh and blood of any living thing to feed it. "Go!" he screamed into the horse's ear. Blossom's neck was extended, her tail straight. Jonathan was low in the saddle, his neck next to hers. "We can do this, girl," he said over the rush of wind. But even with their best efforts, the storm was gaining on them. If Jonathan pushed the horse any harder, the animal would die. The deer carcass was weighing them down. The meat that might keep them alive was also the one thing that might kill him. "Damn it!" Jonathan roared. He loosened the straps holding the deer. Bouncing on the back of a horse made it difficult, but he worked as fast as he could, his hands clumsily untying the abrasive rope's knots. He felt the temptation to look up, but he didn't need to see death to know it was there. A brain-searing screech of thousands and thousands of angry ghosts split the sky. Like a wailing thunderclap, the roar could be heard across the valley. "Feed! Feed!" In a fit of fear and frustration, Jonathan pulled his belt knife and just cut the damn ropes, and let the deer carcass fall away. And with it, any hope for his mother. In saving himself, he doomed her. Blossom picked up speed, and the two of them ran as fast as they could. Fear and the need to survive pushed them. Blossom crested the ridgeline. Below, down the hill in the valley, he saw his home, less than a mile away. The screams from the storm were heard in the sky, heard in his head. They hated, and they hungered. He felt his sanity on the edge, ready to crack. Suddenly, Jonathan heard a sharp snap. Blossom tumbled down hard, taking Jonathan with her. The animal screamed and whinnied in pain, while Jonathan screamed in surprise and anger. Tumbling over and over down the hill, his pack was ripped loose, the pieces of his spanner thrown across the grassy hill. When he finally stopped, he was flat on his back. His body ached and screamed in pain. His sprained wrist refused to move. His fingers were unresponsive. But he had to get up. Foggy and dazed, he stood on shaky legs, then steadied himself as his head spun. Waves of nausea washed over him, and he fought the urge to vomit. Blinking his eyes open, he heard Blossom. She was in pain. The horse was 10 yards away, up the valley hill. He could see the animal's large, beautiful, wet eye. She was scared. Her leg had snapped. He could see the broken bone. And there was nothing he could do. A quick glance up, and Jonathan saw the spirit storm cresting the ridgeline. Like a great demonic hand, the tendrils draped down slowly, feeding off the animal's fear and suffering. He looked back at the horse. "I'm sorry, girl. I'm so sorry," Jonathan sobbed, as he turned his back on her, running towards the house. He heard her cry out as she died. His tears fell. The ghostly storm tore away the living flesh of the animal, flaying her alive. Blossom's screams of fear and abandonment echoed across the valley. "Still hungry. Jonathan. Still hungry." The spirit storm continued its blind search for the living. Jonathan ran across the boundary of the farm's property and straight to the main power box. He grabbed the power levers and pulled all 3 down. The farm's engines sparked to life. The aquifers began pumping the underground water through the buried pipes. The Geist collection turbines around the farm slowly began to rotate, sapping the storm's power for collection. The blitz field crackled on. A dome of energy snapped and popped in place. Jonathan dropped to his knees. The storm slammed against the electrical field. Over and over, wave after wave of psychokinetic energy tried to penetrate the shield to feed on him. Jonathan chanced to look at the storm. Within the swirling purple and black mass of thunderous power, he could make out images of people, spectral forms of the dead, who hated the living. "Jonathan, we hear your dreams. Join us. Feed us." The collected Geist would make for a good harvest. He could take the power cells to Rhinestad and get food rations. If Mother could last that long. Jonathan stood and felt ashamed. When the storm abated the next morning, he would have to try and scavenge what he could. He opened the farm's cottage door and stepped in. The wooden floor creaked under his boots.
"Jonathan?"
A weak voice called out. "I'm here, Mom," Jonathan said. Dropping his coat in a chair, he walked into the back room, holding his now broken wrist. On a small bed lay an emaciated woman. The room smelled of sickness and human waste. The frail woman coughed, and her eyes seemed to have trouble focusing. Jonathan knelt by the bed and took the woman's hand. Her skin felt papery thin and waxy.
"I'm so sorry, Mom. I had a deer, but the storm came. On my way back. I lost the horse. I messed it all up."
The frail lady patted Jonathan's hand as she coughed.
"It's okay, dear. I wasn't that hungry. We'll survive."
Seeing her, Jonathan knew she was lying. She'd die soon. She knew it, too. Even if he had food, she was sick. He had to decide. Tonight. If he let her die while she was asleep, she could rise as one of them. But he could show her the ultimate mercy. He could end her suffering now. Once he burned her body, then her vengeful spirit may find its way to another storm. And that was the world he lived in.
"You go. Rest, dear,"
his mother said weakly.
"You look tired."
Jonathan nodded, saying nothing. Outside, the spirit storm continued battering the farm's defenses. The collectors would deplete most of the valuable Geist. But for now, all he could do was wait. Jonathan picked up the wood axe with his good hand on his way to the cottage's front room. He sat in his chair, exhausted. Holding the axe, he tested the edge with his thumb. It would do the job, if it came to that. But for just a moment, he had to close his eyes. Sleep washed over him. A shuffling along the wooden floor woke him. Jonathan's eyes snapped open. "Hello?"
"Jonathan."
"Mother?" he said, turning in his chair, feeling relieved. The silhouette of the skinny woman stood in the entryway to the cottage's front room. Jonathan could barely make out his mother standing there in the darkness. "Mother, you should be in bed."
"I can't. I'm hungry, Jonathan. So hungry."
Mr. Goat by Matt Godfrey. Performed by Amy Landon. Shortly after the birth of her daughter, strange noises from the nursery began to wake Miriam Applewhite up at night. At first she would burst into the room, afraid something had fallen and woken or even harmed the infant. But each time, the baby would be asleep, and nothing in the room appeared out of place, at least not in the soft glow from the street lamp that reached in from behind the closed curtains. Her husband Tom never heard the noises, but he was a heavy sleeper who had once slept through a tornado that caused significant damage to the house next door. Each morning she would describe the noises to him, a scrape or a thud, a clatter or a bang. Tom would smile, say, "The ghosts are getting so clumsy," then stuff his mouth with a granola bar. Miriam was torn between feeling angry at him for not taking her seriously and frustrated at herself for never finding any proof that something real had happened in the nursery. It was in a state of self-frustration, as she was emptying the diaper pail one morning, that she found the indent in the wall. A small mound of plaster dust lay on the floor against the baseboard, several inches below a jagged round depression. Her first thought was that she would need to go get the spackling, and she hated touching the spackling. But then she stiffened as she realized that this dent must be evidence of whatever she was hearing in the night. The baby cried as she was dropping to one knee to investigate further, so she walked over to the crib where the little girl had been sitting surrounded by toys and scooped her into her arms. They walked over to a picture hanging on the wall, just above the mysterious indentation, an oversized, playful portrait of a goat, wearing a suit and fedora, and continued their daily ritual of Miriam pointing at everything in the room and naming it for the child. The goat stared out of the frame, with eyes narrowed in mischief, a half-smile frozen on his face. His floppy ears were pushed out to the sides by the hat, and his blue suit was complete with a blue and white pinstriped tie and pocket square. "Say hello to Mr. Goat," Miriam would say, waving. The baby recently had started reacting to this daily observance with a smile, and Miriam felt that a wave was close at hand. The online forums said there was still at least a month before that milestone, but Miriam was determined to teach her, and waving at Mr. Goat seemed as good a lesson as any. Then they would move on to the yarn mobile hanging over the crib, at which Miriam would point and say, "Mobile, mobile," exaggerating the syllables until she hated the sound of her own voice, and on to the lamp, the stuffed animals, the other pictures on the walls. Before they left the nursery to name all the other objects in the house, Miriam would always give a last wave goodbye to Mr. Goat. "Say bye-bye to Mr. Goat, Angel. Bye, Mr. Goat. We'll probably get bored in 15 minutes and come say hello to you again." Each word was stretched to twice its normal length, with the false cheeriness of a parent running out of ways to entertain their child. They left the room, and Miriam skipped down the long hallway into the kitchen, bouncing the baby and making her laugh. She stopped abruptly in front of the sink when the wall shook with a huge thud, as if something very heavy had dropped to the floor from a great height. She turned around slowly, unsure of what she would see. The sound had come from the direction of the nursery. She held the child tighter as she padded back down the hall, taking extra care with each step to make as little noise as possible. She craned her neck to see around the doorframe and into the nursery. Everything seemed normal. She entered the room and surveyed the scene, still being as silent as possible, though she wasn't sure why. Nothing had fallen. Everything was in its place. As she walked out of the room and back toward the kitchen, something caught her eye. She turned her head to the portrait of Mr. Goat and stared. A long moment passed between her and the picture. She moved closer, and then closer still, until her face was only inches away from the glass. Was something different? She squinted her eyes in concentration, but nothing came to her. The moment was finally broken, when the baby in her arms started to whine and squirm, bored by the lack of movement. She left the room, not noticing that the little pile of plaster dust had grown, and next to the indentation, there was now a black scuff. Later that night, as she and her husband lay beside each other in bed, each buried in their own iPhone, Miriam came across a photo she had taken earlier in the day of their daughter laughing. They'd been trying for weeks to get a good photo of this, because they both thought she looked so grown up, the way she covered her smile with her two tiny hands. "Hey, look at the picture I got today," Miriam said. She turned the photo toward Tom, and he immediately broke out in a smile. "You're kidding me. What did you do to get her to laugh so much?" He took the phone and moved it closer to his face, still smiling, a father deeply in love with his child. No clue. She was just rolling around on the floor in her room, and I was cleaning up a little. Wasn't even looking at her when she started to laugh. Let's print this one out. Frame it. She took the phone back, and as she looked again at the photo, she froze. She hadn't noticed it before, but now it was all she could see. In the photo, their daughter lay on a blanket on the floor, head angled slightly away from the camera, looking off to the side. She was in focus and the background was slightly blurry, but it was clear that she was looking up at the wall. Looking up at the portrait of Mr. Goat, whose head was turned and pointed down at her, lips open in a wicked smile. She didn't speak for a long time, deciding whether or not it was true, whether or not she was crazy. But the evidence was right in front of her. Her voice caught as she said, "Tom?" But before he could speak, a low thud rumbled their bed. They both snapped their heads in the direction of the nursery. "Now that one I actually heard," Tom said, laughing and tossing off the covers as he climbed out of bed. "I'll go check." He calmly slipped on a pair of house shoes that matched the ridiculous red silk pajamas he loved so much. But Miriam's fear paralyzed her. She sat bolt upright in bed, gripping the covers, too shaken to move. Then, from across the hall, they heard their daughter cry. Miriam scrambled out of bed, her motherly instincts shoving away her fear. Tom rushed to the nursery and threw open the door. Miriam was only a few steps behind, but she could see nothing as Tom stepped into the room and was enveloped by the darkness. The cry subsided, and Miriam stopped outside the door, straining her ears for any hint of sound. The silence stretched on, and just as she was about to go in and check, a large black shape rushed through the shadows in front of her, and the door slammed in her face. She reached for the doorknob, hand shaking, and turned. "Tom!" she shouted over and over, rattling the knob, but unable to open the door. More deep thuds from inside the nursery. She gritted her teeth, backed up a few steps, and threw her shoulder into the door as hard as she could, turning the knob as she did. The door crashed open, and she was thrown into the black. She stumbled into the middle of the room and righted herself, struggling to make out shapes among shadows. "Miriam!" Tom shouted, and she pivoted toward the noise. "Take her!" At first, she didn't understand what was happening. As her eyes adjusted, she finally saw that Tom was on his back, on the floor, clutching the baby to his chest. But he was moving, was being pulled across the rug by his leg. A shape, animal-like, shrouded in shadow, was dragging him toward the wall, toward the portrait of Mr. Goat. "Just take her!" he kept shouting, extending his arms as far as he could, shoving the baby out and away from him. Miriam rushed over and grabbed the child, now crying again, and pulled her close to her chest. The shape pulling Tom raised its head and looked at her, then snorted and bared its teeth. They glinted off the dim light from the hall. She recognized the smile. As she watched, torn between fleeing the room and fighting, the shape backed itself into the wall below the portrait. It put one sinewy leg onto the wall, its hoof resting in the little indentation, bits of paint and plaster dust falling into the growing pile below. It pushed itself up and fell backwards, sinking back into the picture frame. Tom was now upside down, flat against the wall, one leg bent and swallowed by the frame up to the knee. He was disappearing inch by inch in violent little tugs. He screamed and fought, arms flailing, fingernails clutching at the smooth wall. Miriam snapped into action. She shuffled the baby into a one-armed football hold and rushed over to whatever she once believed was a picture frame. She grabbed Tom's arm and pulled. But with only one hand, and nothing to brace herself against, she didn't have the strength to pull him out. Another yank from behind the frame, and he disappeared up to his waist, bent backwards in an excruciating, inhuman way. Maybe if she pulled the frame from the wall, everything would stop. Maybe its power would be broken. She dropped Tom's hand and grabbed the top of the frame. "Everything's going to be okay," she said, and pulled the frame from the wall as hard as she had ever pulled anything in her life. The wire from which it hung snapped, and the frame fell forward, directly over Tom, and landed flat on the floor. She stood, unable to move, looking down at the back of the picture. Even the baby stopped crying, and silence settled. Tom had disappeared underneath the frame. Finally, she gathered the courage to kneel beside the overturned frame and flip it over. It took her hand years to reach out and grip the side of the black plastic. But once she was holding it, she righted the frame in a single swift move. Her breathing was the only thing she could hear as she rose and switched on the light. There were too many shadows without it to confirm what she feared to be true. Once it was on and the room was bathed in a white, irreverent LED shine, she turned around as slowly as she could. There was the frame, perfectly intact on the floor, holding the smirking portrait of Mr. Goat. Except he no longer wore his suit and tie. Now, he wore red silk pajamas. The baby was getting restless, and she squirmed, craning her neck this way and that, until she noticed the portrait, now curiously on the floor. She smiled down at it, extended her arm, and for the first time ever, waved.
Dreams in Black Static by Ambrose Ibsen. Performed by Joe Hempel. Neglect a memory long enough, and it'll get soft around the edges. It'll start to dissolve till only the broadest strokes prevail. I believe that it's only because I can no longer recall the man's face with any real firmness that the strange pull of his blank, staring eyes has, in these interstitial years, finally left me, that I can now speak about that night almost half a decade gone. I'm speaking, of course, of that strange man I met on the street on an autumn night. I'm no stranger to the loiterers and buskers that wander the streets of this vast city at all hours, but on that particular evening, as I was leaving work, I found that the rain had largely chased these types away, and I was left to wait alone in front of my office building in the accruing dusk for my taxi. Standing a few paces from the building's side entrance with an umbrella propped against my shoulder, I watched the cold rain fall. Fat drops struck the grimy pavement in a ceaseless cannonade. The cacophony of said drops was rivaled only by the roar of the curbside currents that gushed into the sewers. As I said, I'd thought myself standing alone on that darkening stretch. But some minutes into my wait, I realized this was not the case. To my right, or was it my left, I made out a frail silhouette through the pounding rain. Beneath the tattered awning there squatted a small, old man clothed in an oversized brown coat. Barely shielded from the rain, the lonesome figure was hunched against the brick facade of the office building and stared out from his huddled pose through narrow lids. I hadn't been aware of his presence more than a minute before I wagered he was staring at me, rather than at some fixture in our waterlogged surroundings. From the battered brown coat he presented a gnarled little hand. He waved, then drew up a small wooden box which he shook feebly. The rattle of coinage sounded from within. I thought him perhaps homeless, seeking charity, and having nothing to give was determined to keep my distance. I stared out at the street for a long while then, anxiously awaiting my cab. The wizened man proved relentless in his beckoning, however. At regular intervals he gave that wooden box of his a shake, and when I chanced to look back at him, he dared another wave. Against my better judgment, I took some few steps back and spared him a little smile. "Sorry," I said. "I don't have any change." That should have been the end of our interaction, but for the noisy crash of the rain or some willful inattention on his part, he outstretched his neck till his face had emerged past the furthest edge of the awning and leered at me. "I will tell you a story," he croaked, his arthritic paw patting the wooden box. "I have no money," I reiterated. The taxi was still nowhere in sight. I considered then returning to the office and placing another call to the cab company, and in retrospect I wish I had. The old man didn't hear, or pretended not to hear, and licked at his lips. "For many years now, I have been blind," he began, and he turned his face up towards me, eyes wide as if to offer proof. His eyes had about them a whitish, milky appearance. Even so, one could not help feeling watched through their dead stare. "But when I lost my sight, I gained something more remarkable. In my dreams, yes, my dreams, I am privy to incredible sights. The world of my dreams is a strange one, young man, very strange indeed, and night after night I glimpse things from that other world, bring them back with me. It's a strange sort of world, that one, a world where the darkness prevails and the sun never rises. Imagine seeing the world through a veil of black static, and you'll know what I mean. It is a story of this untrodden country I now bring you." I should have retreated into the building, should have left the entrance and waited someplace far from the man, but instead I stood and listened to him. What follows, as best I can recall it, was the old man's story, his so-called dream in black static. I wish I'd never heard it. "I dreamt of a less civilized age, an age where some still practiced the old ways, the dark ways. Do you understand? No, perhaps you don't. But I needn't tell you the whole of it. It is enough that you envision the ignorance and turbidity of medievalism. It was in such an age when men were sometimes put to death for dabbling in the old ways. And I tell you that I have had the opportunity to watch such a spectacle with my own eyes. The man accused was in the prime of his life, a fair and lithe thing whose recent workings in dark rites had earmarked him for execution. This youthful specimen was strung to a tall wooden pillar, and kindling was piled about his feet. A throng of villagers sought to burn him, and they flung their many torches into that tinder, spat at him, cursed him. The prisoner pleaded for his life, inhaled the smoke, struggled against his restraints, but in time death took him, if only temporarily. I wish that I could relate to you the raw terror in the faces of those serfs when the body of the accused man did not burn. Yes, I tell it truthfully. Though the fire consumed the tinder, ate away at the robes that held him, the youth's corpse remained untouched. And I can tell you why it was spared. It was because of all the many dabblers in forgotten rites. The devil loved this one best. Panic set in. Further attempts to damage the body proved fruitless. It was reported that his alabaster skin was tough as stone, and that those lungs which had so recently gasped their last now fluttered with a new diabolical life. When the fire had burned through the platform, the restraints, the corpse was set free, and as a marionette moves at the behest of a string, so too did the dead man stand and cast his empty gaze upon those gathered. The peasants fled, uttering their prayers. Meanwhile, the captive took flight on the devil's own wings and was gone. The nights were filled with a new terror as the dead man returned. He was seen from the fields as night reared its head, floating above the trees like a kite with no master. The townsfolk were forced to avoid their windows, lest they spy the revenant lingering thereabouts. It was said that the dead man's eyes were the color of smoke, and that to look into them was to invite it into one's home. In those domiciles where the revenant paid a visit, none survived. Those so struck down would appear to have been burnt, as if on a pyre, though nothing in their surroundings would have been charred. Some avoided this fate by wearing blindfolds after dark. When the figure drew near the village, they would hide and cover their eyes with something to avoid meeting its gaze. Even those who fled to other regions continued this tradition. I wager some keep to it still, for nothing good ever came of staring too long into the night, and that is an old truth. Many a town succumbed in this fashion. One supposes that the figure still remains, haunting distant hillsides, sustained on an ancient devilry. On the face of it, this strange tale was an obvious fabrication. Under any other circumstances, I'd have had no trouble dismissing it out of hand, regarding it as merely the ramblings of the deranged. But I must confess that the seed was thus planted. It's easy for one to hear this account second-hand and laugh it off as nonsense. But for the man who stood in the crashing rain and listened, with increasing interest and unease, I hasten to add, to the old man's croaking voice, it left an immense impression and incited a creeping dread the likes of which I'd never experienced. You will understand, then, that when my cab finally pulled up against the swollen curb some moments later, I lowered my umbrella and ran for it. I'd never been so happy to see a yellow taxi in all my life. As I fled the office building, I heard the man shaking his coin box, demanding payment for that sordid little yarn of his, no doubt. He shook it repeatedly, and with increasing ferocity as I rushed to my ride. Would that I had nothing more to tell. There was one last thing I noticed as I entered the cab. Panting, I told the driver my address, then chanced one more glance outside into the rain-dappled scenery. I studied the building's exterior, meaning to catch one last glimpse of that strange little man, but finding him absent. He had not struck me as particularly spry, and the fact that he'd vanished from sight completely in the space of a few moments left me puzzled and unnerved. I would have been too pleased to leave it at that, to have forgotten the old fellow and his bizarre dream as the cab pulled away and I returned home. But I am afraid that this is just the start of it. At the time, I was living on the top floor of an old apartment complex on the cusp of town. My unit's sole window looked out across a vast field. Whenever it rained, this patchy lot was transformed into a soupy morass, and on this sodden evening it had been so rendered. I went about my routine in the hours after my return, ate something, took a shower, but at no point did I manage to fully overcome the unease that had earlier taken root. Whenever it seemed on the verge of abating, I'd remember the leering old man, the grotesque lilt of his voice, and even the bizarre medieval landscape he'd described from his dream. As sleep approached and I failed to completely purge the details of that dream in black static from my mind, I sat on the edge of my bed, eyes closed, and fancied I could smell the burning tinder, could hear the footfalls of 15th-century peasants in retreat. It was nearly midnight when I finally set my sights on sleep, and I began putting out the lights. No sooner had I switched off the light in my bedroom did I hear something just outside the doorway, however. I stood in the darkness, completely still, and devoted everything I had towards listening. I was sure that I was simply going insane, All the same, the noise I'd heard had sounded something like the ringing of coins in a wooden box. With a mind towards investigating the sound, I took a stroll through my dark apartment, gliding silently from one room to another, and assuring myself that it had been the jangling of a dog's leash in the next apartment, or the clanging of a loose pipe in the building. I had almost convinced myself that I'd misheard when it rang out again. This time, it was too clear to deny. And what's more, the sound had originated outside my door from the communal hallway. A queasy fear stirred to life in me. It wasn't until the rattle of coins sounded a third time that I found sufficient courage to sneak to the door and peer through the peephole. In doing so, I was frustrated to find the hallway empty, and more than that, dark, for one of the bulbs in the ceiling fixture had apparently just burned out. Desperate to put the strange business behind me, I marched off to bed. The lights in my room were put out for the second time, and I went to shut the blinds too, to keep off the glare of the moon. As I fiddled with the cord, however, I glanced out the window, across the soupy lot, and found something that robbed my legs of strength. I nearly toppled over at the sight of something. No, it would be more accurate to say someone, hovering high in the air some distance away. My first thought had been that it was a kite, a large one, but the stark humanoid shape it cut against the turbulent sky suggested otherwise. The possibility that it was some large species of bird proved untenable as well. Distant though it was, I could make out 4 limbs on the thing. In the glow of the moon, its flesh looked white as porcelain. Clouds of blowing mist wreathed its rigid body. I backed away from the window, head spinning. Surely I was dreaming? With a quivering hand, I steadied myself against the wall and leaned towards the window for another look. I sought anything I could find to keep me tethered to reality, something to keep me from spinning off into some mad, dark world. But on second glance, the situation outside had only taken another staggering step into nightmare country. A wicked haze was rolling in from the distance, a harshly obscuring wave more of darkness than of mist. It was as though the rain had stopped falling, only to remain suspended in the air. And as the droplets hung cemented in the darkness, each of them fell somewhere onto a kaleidoscopic palette of pitch. The resulting effect was, I realized, like looking out my window into a storm of black static. And in the midst of that storm, having drawn nearer since my last look, shone the alabaster figure, still suspended in the air like a twisted, staring mannequin. The thing looked carved of marble, unmoving and yet somehow gaining ground. The sound of rattling change pierced the silence as I cowered beside the window. This time the noise had come from outside, from directly beneath my window, it seemed. However great my mounting terror, I had room enough then for a niggling rage. The old man from earlier, he'd found me somehow. Now he'd come to my home, was still angling for the handout I'd neglected to give him during our last meeting. I'd evidently misjudged the old man. My current troubles were plainly owed to his deft linguistic talents, to some hypnotic suggestion he'd planted during that odd and winding tale of his. I returned to the window, mildly invigorated by my anger and intending to curse at him, but the words were never realized. The scene had changed again, continuing its descent into abomination. The sky above and the moon that had hitherto been parked in it were no longer visible, nor was the field below. There existed now only the void of black static and the twisted white figure suspended within it. That figure was close now, close enough to remove any doubt as to its general shape, yet it remained mercifully, far enough away to spare me the full weight of its stare. At sighting the thing, the smell of moisture in the air was replaced with the smell of a raging wood fire. What should have been a cool autumn breeze pregnant with icy mist, was instead a noxious smoke that filled my lungs and accosted my eyes. And with this smoke came heat. I felt a distinct and unnatural warmth all about me, like I was standing very close to an unseen fire. That entity, what a hideous thing it was. Though its body was as proportional and picturesque as a Grecian sculpture, the perpetual pose it struck was in keeping with the very architecture of the nightmarish. Its lengthy, muscled arms were wrapped around its midsection, its legs bowed outward somewhat, only to cross at the ankles. It was the pose of a body leashed to a pillar. Once again the rattling of the coin box sounded from the void. The coins clattered with great insistence, crashed like cymbals in the perfect silence. Having scrambled from the window, I backed deeper into my room, coming to a halt as I met the dresser with my back. Desperate to break the spell, I threw up an arm and knocked everything from the top of the dresser. My watch, wallet, and a small valet tray filled with spare change fell to the floor. At hearing the coins spill out all around me, I grabbed up as many of them as I could find and then crawled back to the window with fistfuls of quarters and dimes. The window was home now to a very different sight. 2 stiff white legs hovered there, close enough that I might have reached out and touched them. The smell of fire waxed dominant. My lungs burned, eyes watered, and an incredible heat washed over me in nigh overwhelming waves. Then, very slowly, the floating corpse began to sink. The tips of its feet fell out of view, and I followed the curve of its calves, the tops of the legs. Then a taut abdomen entered into view. Very soon now a chest would enter into frame. It was lowering itself inch by inch, and in no time at all would be looking in at me. It sought my eyes, wished to fix me with its dead stare. At the moment I glimpsed a twisted white neck, I cast my fistfuls of change out the window and buried my face in the carpet. "Leave me alone!" I cried, fists balled. Pulses of raw heat buffeted me. I felt the sweat on my skin bubbling, then evaporating. The next thing I heard while I remained huddled against the floor were the coins raining down across the rain-soaked lot. There was a burst of furtive sloshing as some unseen gatherer set about plucking them up, and I heard each of them being noisily deposited into something like a wooden box shortly thereafter. Clink, 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 clink. Finally, after seeming eons, the phantom warmth retreated and the sound of the rain reached my ears. I can't tell you how long it took me to look to the window again. I was probably an hour in finally looking upward, and when I did, I saw that the rain had largely ebbed, and the sill had grown very damp. Some time later, I summoned the courage to crawl to the window and look outside, but when I did, I found only an empty lot. The rain quit soon thereafter, and the remainder of the night wore on in the expected fashion. You may be telling yourself that this story of mine was clearly some fever dream, that such things don't and can't happen in the real world. Believe what you will, but allow me to leave you with this. Traumatized though I'd been by the whole experience, I found something of reason when the sun reared its head, and through sheer stubbornness, I tried to convince myself of precisely that I'd suffered a nervous breakdown or had hallucinated the entire ordeal. I ventured out into that muddy lot outside in the minutes after sunrise, sure that no corroborating proofs existed. Out in the field, I found 2 things, however. First, I discovered that, despite my having tossed 2 handfuls of coins out my window, not a single dime remained in the field. It was entirely possible that someone had wandered by in the hours since my episode and picked them up, but how, in the darkness, had they managed to claim each and every one? Well, this was a strange thing, but not so strange that it could not be chalked up to the commonplace. The other thing I discovered in the field was harder to explain, and it's the chief reason why I no longer look out my windows at night, and why I make certain to carry spare change with me whenever I leave the house. I discovered a series of small footprints in the mud directly below my window. They seemed to me small and gnarled prints, the kind that might well be left behind by ancient feet. I studied these prints for some time in the mounting dawn, and followed them a little ways, as far as was possible anyhow. From my window, the maker of these tracks had turned and gone back across the vast field. There was a lengthy series of prints in the fresh mud, and as I said, I followed them for quite some distance. But eventually I reached a point where the trail ended without explanation. Beyond the last set of prints there existed only virginal mud, and a thorough exploration of the surrounding area turned up no recurrence of them elsewhere. The trail simply ended in the middle of a field. It was as if the individual had ceased to walk, like he'd taken to the skies on the devil's own wings.
The Family Ghost by Susan C. Hunter, performed by Holly Palance. This is a ghost story, I guess. Well, maybe not a story exactly, more a recounting of a series of unexplained events. They all happened in just the way I will tell it. No embellishments. It is a work of nonfiction. Unless, of course, you don't believe in the supernatural. Then I suppose you will think of it as fiction, because it is not in your ability to consider it otherwise. For those of you in need of bloody corpses or sightless, black-socketed night wanderers, this is not the tale for you. There will be no crash of lightning or howling hounds. No skeletal fingers will grasp your ankle and drag you into a new dug grave. And there will certainly be no pallid maidens with flowing tresses who join you in your midnight bed, only to turn to dust at dawn. Because this tale is true. Every word. I am witness. I was there. It is an indisputable fact that every tale of the supernatural must include a place for ghostly specters to creak around in. It can be a mighty ocean liner, like the Queen Mary, once the monarch of the seas, now a self-contained tourist attraction, complete with nightly tours of the haunted swimming pool and eerie engine room. It can be an historic battlefield like Gettysburg, where on dark nights when the ghost fog descends, the sounds of neighing horses, cannon fire, and screaming men in the throes of death crash like thunder upon the ears of the living. Or it can be the deadly turn in a lonesome Texas road, where a phantom hitchhiker, face shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat, brings tragedy to any truck driver foolish enough to pick him up. The setting in tonight's story is no such place. I say tonight because I assume that, like any connoisseur of creepy tales, you have set the mood. The hour should be cold and lonely, dreary, as Poe would say. A single candle illuminates your blood-drained face, its dancing flame casting long shadows across the faded walls. The branches of an ancient oak scratch the window pane with every gust of wind, and a luminous full moon shivers behind heavy clouds. Add a raven perched on a bust of Pallas, and you've gone too far. Ditch the bird, but whisper the word nevermore, enough times to wrap yourself in a cloak of dread. Nevermore. 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 Now, any ghost story will chill you to the marrow. even this one. Disappointingly, the house of this tale gives out no sense of foreboding or danger. It is a pretty two-story clapboard-style structure, built somewhere around the turn of the last century. It is painted a cheery buttercup yellow, with a bright turquoise front door. Decorative white shingles encircle the lower third of the structure. A balcony runs across the entire front of the house, and a small enclosed porch with a low roof protrudes from the back. Besides the porch, there are 4 main rooms on the lower floor, connected by a narrow hallway: den, living room, dining room, and kitchen. A winding staircase leads to the upper level, where there are a bathroom and 3 bedrooms, also connected by a hallway. No cobwebs hang from the ceiling. Everything is neat and in its place. Antique dolls fill several display cases, but none of them seem possessed by evil forces. A large magnolia tree stands in the front yard and an ancient avocado in the back. It used to bear delicious fruit, but now is past its prime. Neither tree is close enough to whip against the windows in a rainstorm, and no glowing-eyed imps perch in the branches. The entire house emits an aura of serene domesticity. Its residents, my family, are equally benign. We know very little about the history of the house before 1958, when my parents purchased it in order to provide space for our burgeoning numbers. 3 kids, with 1 on the way, was too much for the tiny track house we had previously called home. They bought the house from a couple named Morehouse, who had a grown son. They seemed normal enough, except perhaps for the fact that they had completely filled one of the upstairs rooms with dozens, maybe hundreds, of trophies. When they moved out, they left behind a large stuffed fish, mounted and ready for hanging on the wall, and a ghost, whose spirit inhabits our house, and how it got there has never been answered. Our house is one of 2 old ones on the street, all the others having been built around 1950, according to dates stamped on the curbs. The Wrights, who lived in the other vintage home, recalled that originally our 2 houses stood maybe a quarter mile further north, and that the entire surrounding area had been nothing but citrus groves. Oldest daughter Janine Wright told of riding in her house when the 2 buildings were moved to their current location. Did our ghost ride along too, or was our house unceremoniously plopped down on top of someone's final resting place? An orchard worker, perhaps, who tumbled to his death while picking oranges. Maybe the victim of a heinous murder, buried among the trees, whose undiscovered grave lies beneath the foundation of our home. Our phantom could even predate the citrus grove, possibly an early settler, or a Native American dweller, or a prehistoric hunter, any of whom took their last breath on the very spot where now our house stands. Or is it possible we conjured the ghost ourselves, brought it with us, or unknowingly called it up from somewhere in the vast ether? This may be the most likely scenario, as you will see from the facts of the case. We call our ghost Potmore, imagining a male entity, although some of the encounters have pointed toward a female. Nevertheless, we never referred to Potmore as she, perhaps because of the rather robust nature of his energy. Anyway, no one has ever disputed his gender, even when the facts suggest otherwise. Potmore's name derived from his first known appearance. He may have always been around, but with 4 noisy kids and assorted noisy pets in the house, maybe we never noticed. It wasn't until my teenaged years that we became aware of our spectral housemate. It was a night when my parents had gone out for the evening, leaving me in charge of the younger siblings. My sister Catherine and I were in our bedroom upstairs, and our much younger brother Clark was asleep in his room across the hall. My brother Scott slept in a room downstairs that has variously been used as a den or a bedroom over the years. As Catherine and I watched television, I suddenly heard Scott pound up the stairs and slam the bathroom door. As this was not particularly unusual for him, I did not investigate. A while later, Catherine remarked, "Scott has been in the bathroom for an awful long time." Again, not that unusual for him, so we let it pass, pretty much forgetting about him. But clearly, she had heard the same thing I did, without either of us mentioning it to the other at the time. Maybe an hour later, the doorbell rang. I went downstairs to investigate. There was Scott on the porch. "Let me in," he said. "I forgot my key." "What are you doing out there? I thought you were in the bathroom," I replied. "Huh? I've been at the football game all night. I just got home." "Then who ran upstairs and slammed the door to the bathroom?" "Not me." And so we named our ghost Potmore, for his favorite room in the house, the pot. He was an unobtrusive spirit. He rarely made a stir. There would be nothing for months. Then I would awaken in the still of the night to the sound of footsteps on the stairs, or the rattle of doorknobs turning inexplicably. Invariably, the next morning, someone in the house would say, "I heard Potmore creeping around last night." And we would all shiver a bit, since it was the first time anyone had heard him in a while. Yet several of us had been awakened by him the same night. Still, he kept a low profile, until all at once he upped his game. Maybe we had been too complacent. Maybe we had failed to appreciate the subtlety of his haunting style. Maybe he just wanted us to acknowledge his place in the family. Whatever the reason, he took charge of the situation. The following incidents are the most memorable, not necessarily in chronological order. One day, I was in the house alone, working in the kitchen. The doorbell rang across the house, and I went to answer it. When I opened the door, the porch was empty. No one was there, so I returned to the kitchen. Again, the doorbell rang. I returned only to find no one on the porch again. I returned again to the kitchen, and the same action was repeated. Figuring it was some prankster, this time I stayed in the hallway next to the door, waiting to catch whoever was teasing me. The doorbell rang again, and instantly I threw open the door. The porch was empty. No one was fleeing down the sidewalk. No one was hiding behind the bushes. No one was there at all. Creeped out, I left the house and went for a walk. When I returned, everything was quiet and back to normal. A family friend was spending a week at our house, sewing costumes for the local community theater, his place being too small for the masses of fabric and ribbons that needed to be strewn around. In the wee hours of one pre-dawn, he labored away, cutting patterns on the large dining room table. All other occupants had long ago taken to their beds. The light of the overhead chandelier glowed above him, but the rest of the house was shrouded in shadow. The only sound was the soft snip-snip of his scissors and the occasional bark of a dog somewhere out in the dark, cloaked neighborhood. Coming to a natural break in the procedure, he headed for the tiny downstairs bathroom on the back porch. As he crossed the threshold between kitchen and porch, he heard a rustling noise, like that of a long silk skirt, and felt a woman brush past him. He stepped back to let her pass, then froze, appalled, realizing there was no one there. He immediately turned on the kitchen light and searched the 4 downstairs rooms, but found nothing. He abandoned his project, went to bed on the designated couch, and pulled the blankets up over his head, refusing to uncover his eyes until dawn. In the morning, when he recounted his story to the rest of us, we all assured him that no one had come downstairs at any time after retiring for the night. He told the tale of his encounter many times through the years. Then, one night, despondent over the breakup of a long-time love affair, as well as the dread of an empty bank account with no hope of filling it, he hung himself in the stairwell of his home, joining, perhaps, the legions of restless spirits who glide the earth, caught between life and eternal rest. After a while, our house got a reputation with people. Everyone wanted to meet Potmore. Our friends would arrive with Ouija boards or would beg for seances in the den, usually with little otherworldly result. This seemed to be fine with them. Most of them, I think, liked the titillation of calling on the supernatural forces without having to deal with an actual manifestation. Even so, a couple of our sessions got weird enough to send Catherine running from the room in terror, resulting in our parents nixing further paranormal ventures. But teenagers being teenagers, we were determined to continue. One night, just before Christmas, there was a gathering of about 7 or 8 kids. My parents and our dog Ginger had banished themselves upstairs, so naturally we decided it was the perfect time for a surreptitious seance. We sat in a circle on the living room floor, joined hands, and solemnly beseeched the spirits to come forth. Not much was happening. "Show us a sign of your presence," one of us, probably me, moaned mysteriously. Suddenly, across the room, a glass ball flew off the Christmas tree. It was not an accidental slip from a weak branch. This ball seemed to have been propelled with violent force. We stared in alarm at the smashed ornament. Immediately, Ginger began barking from upstairs. She came running down the steps, still barking furiously, and rushed into the living room, then stopped dead, staring into the air at the exact place where the ball had fallen. Her bark turned to a low growl, and the hair on the back of her neck slowly stood on end. She held her ground, staring and growling for what seemed like an eternity. How she knew what had just happened from upstairs, I do not know, but she obviously saw something in the corner by the tree, something she didn't like. The party broke up hurriedly. Most of the guests from that night never set foot in our house again. That was also the last of the seances. Potmore had showed us a sign, and we didn't need to see any more. There was the time when my parents had hosted a dinner party with another family, everyone in the living room the whole time, and my brother Clark went upstairs to find the entire contents of his bedroom tossed into the hallway. And the time I came home from a late-night college activity to find the front door standing wide open, no lights on inside. Fearful that an intruder had ransacked the house and possibly murdered my family, I began ringing the doorbell with the reasoning that the marauder would be startled and exit out the back door rather than run towards me and do me in as well. I kept ringing and ringing until from the shadows I saw my sister's face peering from around the corner of the stairs, eyes wide with fear. "Catherine, you're alive!" I cried in relief. "Why are you ringing the bell with the door wide open?" she answered. I ran to her, hugged her, and together we searched the whole house for any signs of foul play, leaving the lights ablaze in each room as we passed. Everything was untouched, and all my family members were safe in their beds. My father swore he had secured and locked the door before retiring that night. He said he remembered doing so because he knew I had a key to let myself in when I came home, so he wanted to make sure the family would be safe as they slept. One last incident occurred before things quieted down for good. My mother came downstairs one morning to find a crystal goblet smashed on the floor in the dining room. How it had been broken is still a mystery, since it had come from a glass display case against the wall, whose door was securely closed. How the goblet had made its way out of the cabinet and crashed on the ground is still a mystery. Eventually, the house became an empty nest for my parents. With the absence of boisterous kids, everything settled into a world of placid silence. If any strange incidents occurred, they either ignored them or took it in stride. Maybe Potmore, too, lost his will to haunt without any excitable young people around. As a new generation of kids arrived, the stories of our ghost became little more than family legend, although my nephew Alex, now a fully grown man, is still too psyched out to stay in the house alone. Recently, however, Potmore has put in at least one more appearance. My sister and her husband had moved back home to help care for things in my dad's final days. One night, she sat up in the dining room well past the witching hour when she heard footsteps on the stairs. She turned to see a small female figure dressed in black descending the steps. Thinking it was my mother, she asked her what she was doing up so late. As soon as she spoke to her, my sister realized that the figure did not resemble our mother at all. She was smaller and dressed, as Catherine puts it, like Holly Golightly. Catherine got up and followed the figure, who had moved out of sight into the hallway. But when she turned the corner, the woman had evaporated into thin air, leaving no trace. These days, there is evidence of other ghosts in the house. My son swears he has felt a phantom cat rub up against his legs on more than one occasion. My mother has felt it too, but is certain it's a dog. Just the other night, as I sat by myself in the living room, the rest of the house tucked in for the night, I could have sworn I heard the scrabbling of doggy feet romping around in the hallway. After my dad passed away peacefully in the house in 2014, various incidents have hinted that he has not left us entirely either. So, is it possible that Potmore has company? I hope it isn't getting too crowded for him. We wouldn't want him to leave. After all, he is as important to our lives as we are to his afterlife.
Wendigo by Molly Coyle. Performed by Lauren Ezzo. The devil visited Constance. He often appeared at the last wisps of twilight, before the black of night swallowed the deep blue of the fading sunset. His woody scent moved from the shadows of the barn into Constance's periphery, rough fingers gently teasing the downy hair at the nape of her neck. Constance sat up, not daring to look behind her. She had made that mistake once. Every Sabbath, for as far back as Constance could remember, Reverend Smith warned the tiny village to remain vigilant of Satan in disguise. 3 years ago, on a particularly hot Sunday, he focused on the youth of the congregation, tearing their flesh apart with his eyes as he espoused the myriad of tortures inflicted in hell. The usually wretched young boys sitting on the pulpit steps had ceased their wriggling as they listened with unwavering attention. Somewhere between the burning threats of the minister and the sweltering inferno of the meeting-house, Constance choked on an inhale of breath, and a soft cough passed through her lips. Reverend Smith only flicked his eyes at her for a moment, though, before moving on to the older teens sitting in the lofts. Constance glanced at the men's pews, where her father's gaze met her own. She offered him a silent apology and slumped slightly further into the space between her younger sisters. That night was the first night the devil came to visit. Constance had finished locking the chickens in their coop when a hand rested gently upon her shoulder. She jumped at the contact, but quickly relaxed when a familiar face greeted her. She told him that she was almost finished. She needed only to fetch her lantern from the wall. Kind hands turned unforgiving as Constance's back met the musty straw of the barn floor. Her stomach clenched at the strange treatment, and she wondered if she was to be punished for interrupting the sermon. Then the lights went out, and a great heaviness fell upon her. Pain tore through her from the bottom up. She cried out to God for protection, but the devil covered her mouth with his hand and lay upon her until all innocence had perished. The next day, Constance limped gingerly from the river after washing away her misdeeds. With watery eyes, she tempted the chickens from their broods with cornmeal. One of the nests had hatched in the night. Constance picked up a chick, holding it to her face where it peeped soothingly against her skin. One hot tear after another baptized the chick with confessions of her wickedness. Then, a thick numbness settled over Constance. The world went mute, except for a faint, high-pitched buzz, not dissimilar to the sound of a mosquito. She moved slowly, watching the world turn around her. Her fingers swirled around the fragile creature's head. Once, twice, 3 times before she pinched it tightly and twisted. The sharp snap of vertebrae ended the trance. When she looked at the lifeless body in her hand, Constance felt only empty. The next month, it was a mouse, its plump, gray body crushed beneath the leather sole of her shoe. Then a baby squirrel, searching for its far-off nest, only to meet the pointy end of a whittled stick. Constance preferred toads and frogs when she could find them. Amphibians, with their soft flesh and malleable skeletons, burst like boils without much effort. Constance watched, unperturbed as the gore dripped across her knuckles and back into the water. It should be enough, but it wasn't. It took another year before Constance killed anything larger than a hen. Feral instincts overtook her body as she smothered a tabby cat by the river. A shrill sound raged through her ears, commanding her to hold fast until the animal lay limp against the reeds. Still unsated, Constance wept with frustration into lifeless, silky fur. There was a word for her. An Indian legend whispered chillingly between youths. Wendigo. Constance shivered the first time she tested out the word, mouthing it delicately as a prayer as she hurled freshly laid eggs against a tree. The mystical fusion of ancient syllables and fresh blood awakened a dormant and terrifying power within the young woman. Death no longer frightened her. Then the devil called. He carefully pushed her belly onto the hay. Constance whined softly as he continued with the routine, covering her lips with his palm to mute her. She mouthed her word against salty flesh. Wendigo. The devil shuddered. With each thrust, Constance's teeth pushed against his palm. The world buzzed with the faint ringing of a high-pitched note. A metallic taste landed on her tongue as Constance's teeth punctured the surface of his skin. The devil moaned. She sucked hard at his palm, suddenly filled with insatiable hunger. Wendigo. Constance rolled over. She stared at the devil, taking in the deep wrinkles of his face. Wrinkles that doubled when he'd smiled at her birthday and crinkled with sorrow as he watched England grow smaller from the stern of the ship. His eyes held hers cautiously, and he began to move again. Constance threw her head back and growled as the piercing note crescendoed past tolerability. Wendigo. Faster, harder. Constance gripped the devil's shirt with white knuckles. Wendigo. She transformed. Her muscles ripped. Bones snapped. Her back arched abruptly and her head snapped forward with such velocity that the devil's head broke open in the front. He sat back. She lunged at the crimson waterfall pulsing from his crown. With a flattened tongue, she took one long taste before opening her mouth and latching onto his throat. His limbs flailed desperately as he tried to fight her off, but Constance held firm, tearing and slashing until the world was red and still. In the last wisps of twilight, before the black of night swallowed the deep blue of the fading sunset, Constance licked the blood of the devil from her fingers.
The Whimsy by Petria Burchard, performed by Rachel L. Jacobs. Meet me at the Whimsy Lounge Tuesday night, 8 p.m. sharp. Desperate to see you. Come alone. T. I found the note in the bushes outside our apartment. Blue ballpoint pen on notebook paper, blocky handwriting slanting to the left. The note was crumpled and dirty, but the writing was clear. I held the note between my finger and thumb and looked around. Our apartment was in a courtyard with a few bushes and not much grass. It's a plain stucco building, painted tan, probably built in the 1970s. Not gorgeous. No one peeked from behind a curtain. No one watched me that I could see. I put the note in my wallet and tucked it in my purse. Desperate to see you. Who writes that? I'd never been inside the Whimsy Lounge, but I'd seen it from the bus on the way to work. It looked like a dive, the kind of place where the bartender knows the regulars by their faces, no names. And there's no kitchen service except stale peanuts from a vending machine. I imagined it smelled like cigarette smoke, and the floor was sticky. I showed the note to Erin when she got home that night. We were cuddled up on the couch watching TV. Erin said, "Why'd you bring home litter?" She was laughing. She had a great smile. She used to say I was reckless, but I'm not. I just follow my gut. Erin said I was the craziest girl she'd ever met, but that's why she loved me. I'm gonna go there Tuesday night, I said. Her smile dropped. No, you don't know what desperate means. Her eyes were clear and wide. Maybe the person who got the note threw it away, I said. Maybe they lost it by accident. Maybe they'll show up, maybe not. You'll stick out in a straight bar like that. Take your brother. How do you know it's a straight bar? Come on. Of course it was a straight bar. Dan works nights. You come with me. No, but take somebody or don't go. That place is creepy. We both knew I'd go. I met Erin when she worked at the newspaper with Dan. He dragged me to the company picnic, said I needed to get out of the apartment and meet people. I guess I did. Erin was there with a guy, and I don't know what gave me the nerve. Just my usual recklessness, I guess. I had this urge to flirt with her, and it seemed like she flirted back. When I saw her go into the women's restroom, I took my chance, got up from the picnic table, and followed her right in. I was nervous. Must have washed my hands 10 times waiting for her to come out of the stall, and when she came, I acted surprised. She laughed. She knew I'd been waiting. So I just said I wanted to kiss her, and she said that would be all right, and I kissed her. Fireworks is the wrong word. It's more like an aching, a sort of push in your groin. I never felt it so strong. But later, there was something delicate about loving her. I was her first girlfriend, her only, and that seemed like a thing to hold, carefully. It made me feel protective of her, and proud. Hell, it made me puff out my meager chest and strut. Foolish, but happy. Tuesday evening, I wore jeans and a pink sweater. I'm tall and skinny and have short hair. I'm not an obvious dyke, but I wanted to play it down. I didn't want to stand out in the whimsy lounge crowd, which is funny because I didn't know who that crowd would be. Erin walked me to the bus stop. It was already dark with no moon, but the night was warm and the streetlights spilled big circles on the sidewalk. We stood in the shadows, even though there was no one around. When we saw the bus coming, Erin gripped my arm with her small hand. Her face was pale. "Let's go home," she said. I took a second to listen to my gut, but it wasn't saying anything. I touched Erin's cheek. I always did that instead of kissing her. Even in the city, there are still people who don't want to see two women kissing. So we're careful. It'll be fun, I said. An adventure. You should come. She sighed, giving up. Text me when you're on your way home. She let go of my arm and smiled, wrapping her sweater tight around herself, even though it was warm. It was hard not to kiss her then. I wasn't used to riding the bus at night. During the day, it was so crowded I usually had to stand and hang on to the railing. On a Tuesday night, I had the whole seat to myself. I sat behind the driver and looked around. I wasn't scared, but I thought I should stay aware of my surroundings. A tired-looking woman across the aisle from me held her purse to her chest like it was a life jacket or something. People got on, people got off. It felt like it took forever to get to my stop, a block from the Whimsy. It's in the old part of downtown where commercial streets share corners with residential ones, and hunched-up old people walk home from the store carrying a bag in each hand by the handle. It's miles from the hip nightclubs, and there weren't a lot of people out. Most of the stores were closed, but the diner was open. I could see through the window. In a booth, a middle-aged couple sat eating, not talking. I passed a fluorescent-lit mobile phone shop all locked up and a storefront church with rows of folding chairs inside and no one sitting in them. I paused across the street from the Whimsy. Above the sidewalk, the neon sign buzzed and snapped. One of the letters was out, and it blinked. Whimsy Unge in pink and green. It was 2 minutes to 8. My gut started talking. Aaron was right. This was crazy. The note could have been about any Tuesday already in the past. T could be anyone. Tom, Teresa, Terry, or a nickname. Tidbit, Tubby. My gut flashed and buzzed like the neon. Don't go. Don't go. Don't go. When I grabbed the door handle, my hand shook. I pulled open the heavy door and stepped into a corridor lit by dim, yellowish light. The room beyond was so dark it was almost invisible. The floor wasn't sticky, but the Whimsy Lounge smelled of stale beer. I walked down the corridor. At the other end, I had to let my eyes adjust. An old wooden bar ran the length of the room. Mirrored shelves behind it glowed with rows of green, gold, and brown liquor bottles. The bartender, a woman of about 60, glanced at me when I came in. Her blonde hair was frizzy and dry from dye, and her face was wrinkled in a permanent frown. She was waiting on a woman at the far end of the bar, who also turned to look at me. Everyone did. I could feel them twisting their necks almost in unison. They were obvious about it, stopping mid-sip, rotating on their chairs to stare. Aaron was right. I stood out. I didn't belong. I shouldn't have gone there. The man closest to my end of the bar was fat, with a comb-over and a soiled canvas jacket. He spun his empty shot glass with a pudgy hand and glared at me. Beside him, a skinny guy in a baseball cap and work boots looked me up and down. At the far end, the bartender's customer had just received her beer. She was a middle-aged woman with hair poofed up like the proper wife of a 1970s politician. When she checked me out, she looked hopeful. There was a jukebox, but no music played. No one danced. A young guy in a business suit sat alone at a table nursing a cocktail and surreptitiously trying to get a load of me. The old lady at the next table stared openly, eyebrows raised and mouth open so wide she looked scared. She wore a cotton house dress and a ratty sweater, as if she'd run out the door at the last minute. I stood debating whether I should take a table, sit at the bar, or just turn and go. I didn't know how to react to being stared at like I was a rabbit and they were a pack of coyotes. The bartender ambled my way. "What can I get you?" "Oh." I couldn't think of anything else to say. She pointed at the empty stool at the near end of the bar next to the fat guy with the comb-over. "Have a seat. I got a nice lager on draft." I climbed up. "Thanks." I put a $10 bill on the bar, hoping that would cover the lager and a tip. I would drink up and go. like my gut was finally begging me to do. The fat guy looked at his shot glass. People turned away at last. I could see them in the mirror behind the bar. Most of them looked at their drinks or at the door. The bartender brought a glass of beer and change. "I'm Arlene. What's your name?" I didn't even think. "People call me T." Arlene straightened. The fat guy's bar stool creaked when he spun around. Everyone's eyes returned to me. Even if I couldn't see them, I could feel their eyes like fingers on my skin. "I'm sorry," I said. "Is that bad?" No one answered. That's when I realized everyone in the place was a single. There were no couples nuzzling in the corner, no groups sharing a pitcher. The people at the bar weren't even talking to each other. They were just sitting, drinking, looking at me. I should go. I stepped down from the stool. My heart was banging. "You're not going anywhere," said Arlene. She grabbed for my hand. I ran to the door, but the business suit guy had shot up from his chair. He took a couple of long strides, slammed the door to the corridor, and bolted it. I almost ran into him. I could tell from his eyes he was sober. Angry. "Why did you send the notes?" He didn't shout. His voice came from somewhere in his throat. They all waited for my answer, staring, silent. I was the only one breathing, and my breathing was heavy. My heart was loud. "I didn't send them," I said. The guy crossed his arms. He didn't move. He didn't believe me. "I found one," I said. I moved my hand slowly. He watched as I slid my wallet from my pocket, removed the note, and held it up to show it to him. He blinked. "We all got one," said the woman with the politician wife hair. I turned. She opened her pocketbook to show her note. After a second, the skinny guy flipped his note from his shirt pocket and waved it with greasy fingers. The old lady pulled hers from the end of her sweater sleeve with a trembling hand. Even from several feet away, I could see the notes were all like mine. Same notebook paper, same blocky letters, same slant to the left. "Who else walked in at 8 p.m. sharp?" said Arlene, her frown deepening. "Who else is called T?" "I'm not," I said. "I'm sorry. T just came out because of the note, I guess." I didn't really know why. I backed away from the suit guy to step over to the bar and show my note to Arlene, along with my driver's license, so she could see I didn't have a T in my name. She should have asked for my ID in the first place. She took my license and held it to the light, squinting. In a clear voice, she read it aloud to everyone. Every word. Name, date of birth, height, weight, and address. She looked around the bar. "What do you think?" she asked the room. "Stupid girl," said the fat guy. "You shouldn't fuck with people," said the baseball cap guy, stuffing his note back into his pocket. Arlene returned my driver's license and looked away. The suit guy pulled the bolt and stepped aside, but not by much. I ducked under his arm and ran. Outside, the neon reflected pink, green, pink, green on the sidewalk. I ran. The bus wasn't at the stop. I ran. I ran to the next stop, and the next, and the next, until I saw the bus catching up to me. I had missed a call from Erin. She didn't leave a message. I texted her to let her know I was on my way home. She texted back, but it was only a couple of letters without a period or anything, like she had texted by accident. I hoped she wasn't mad. The bus couldn't go fast enough. At my stop, I jumped down and ran the 3 blocks to our place. The courtyard light glared. Our apartment window was dark except for the flicker of the TV. In the hallway, I unlocked the door, panting from running and knowing I'd find Erin on the couch watching TV. I'd go to her and hold her in my arms and tell her she was right about the whimsy. I stopped just inside the door. She was seated on the sofa, in the dark, with the TV on but silent. Her eyes were wide and unseeing. Blood everywhere. "Erin," I whispered. I knew she wouldn't answer. I waited and listened. We were alone. I moved closer to her. There was no weapon left behind. Only a note stuck onto Erin's flannel shirt with a straight pin, as though she were a bulletin board. The same paper, same handwriting, the blocky letters, the slant. "Thanks for playing, T." I reached out to pull the pin away. Then I stopped myself. I shouldn't touch anything. Not even her cheek. With my eyes on Erin, because I couldn't leave her, I pulled my phone from my pocket. I dialed 911 and told the operator what I saw and where I was. Then I stood still and waited for the sirens. I thought of the people at the Whimsy Lounge. For the moment, they were each alone, like me, waiting, playing T's game. But they knew my name. They had my address.
The Clockmaker, by Beth Green. Performed by Danielle Cohen. Ears ringing, mouth still buzzing with the shock of the last shot of absinthe, Rachel stumbled up the stone staircase and burst out of the medieval-themed basement bar and into the cold November night air. She'd done it. She rubbed her neck, hardly believing she'd had the guts to steal the top-secret data. Just as Michael instructed, she'd waited and sipped absinthe at the bar until she had the chance to swap out the USB drive in the tall man's briefcase with a substitute. It had been an easy task, only a few seconds' work. The drive fit perfectly in the hidden pocket, which, in a splurge of gleeful anticipation, she'd had a tailor insert in her coat lining. The coat was one of several luxuries she'd allowed herself, but only one of many treats she anticipated after she got paid for tonight. Eager to get out of sight before her theft was discovered, Rachel slipped into the shadows of a nearby alley to get her bearings. She had 15 minutes to find the Hotel Orloy and give the USB drive to Michael. But which way to the hotel? She'd spent the whole weekend playing tourist in Prague to learn the streets of the old town and give herself an alibi in case her company got suspicious that one of their underling accountants was in the same city on a mini-break the day the firm's most important project data was stolen. She'd dutifully walked the cobblestones, studied the maps, and even taken a stultifying tour of old town architecture. The medieval streets of Prague, one of Europe's best-preserved capitals, were notoriously convoluted. The absinthe she drank tonight had more of an effect than planned. It was fragmenting her thoughts. But, even dizzy, she knew where she was going. She needed to turn here and... No. She stopped again and rubbed her hands for warmth. Nothing on the dark, barren street was familiar. On her way to the assignment, she'd taken note of shops and restaurants to guide her back. Turn left at the jazz bar, right at the wax museum. But where the hell were her landmarks? And why was it so dark? She must have turned into some residential area where tourists hadn't yet penetrated. There were no comforting neon signs assuring her of cheap beer, free exchange rates, or lurid sex shops. No artificially frosted windows displaying curated boutique wares. No streetlights. Not even a goddamn pub dispensing the country's famous Pilsner beer. Even stranger, she couldn't hear the regular hubbub of city life that would extend beyond the old quarter. The rumble and almost imperceptible vibrations of the metro system, the honk of an impatient taxi, the laughter of people spilling out of the bar to smoke on the sidewalk. She must have made a wrong turn. The absinthe, the excitement had addled her. Time was wasting. She had 5 or 10 minutes to find her way to Michael now. Was it safe to turn on her cell phone and use the Maps app to find the hotel? She had to meet Michael, wanted to meet him, to see the look of gratitude on his face when she handed over the drive, to ask him what his plans were next week when her actions tonight had made them both rich. She slipped the phone out of her coat pocket, nearly dropping it from her numb fingers, and jabbed the power button. The screen remained dark. Of all the times for a dead battery. The air must be too cold. She walked to the next intersection. It was creepy how quiet this neighborhood was. She didn't see any shops, bars, hotels, none of the city's ubiquitous tour groups passing by. Tour groups. That reminded her. Rachel turned her face to the sky and scouted the rooftops. Prague was the city of 1,000 spires, the guide had said. One of the distinctive cupolas could lead her to a central landmark. But it was no use. She could see nothing. A thick haze was creeping down the buildings and had already obscured the roofline. Well, shit. She had to do something, so she chose a direction and walked. Somewhere above the fog, a full moon lent its brightness to the haze, creating a luminescence that helped her avoid stepping in holes where cobblestones were missing and leap over piles of horse manure that must have been left by one of the city's tourist carriages. She drew further into her coat and hurried. The absinthe had burned its way down to her stomach, while her head felt like it was going to float off into the descending fog. She would be too late. Michael had warned her. Only 15 minutes from the theft to the delivery, or they'd be compromised. Once the tall man realized what she'd taken from the briefcase. At last, a sign of life interrupted her thoughts. Footsteps and voices echoing in the canyon of shuttered buildings. She needed to be smart, her hands clenched in her pockets. What if the tall man already discovered the cuckoo USB drive in his briefcase? Sent men after her? Instinct pushed her to walk faster, and when she spotted the empty mouth into a passage, one of the Warren-like tunnels that slithered through the city's buildings and connected side streets, she ducked into it. But came up short when iron grates barred her path. Precious seconds later, she re-emerged on the street. The people were audibly closer. She ran now, feeling herself slide into panic, brain fuzzy with the alcohol. At the corner, relief. The street spilled out into Old Town Square. Of course. She shouldn't have had that last shot of absinthe. In front of her, the town hall with its dual-dial astronomical clock. When her tour passed through Old Town Square today, she'd heard all about the centuries-old clock. She had stood shivering in the cold while they waited 20 minutes to see the clock chime the hour, so some stupid puppets would come out and ring a bell. The people in her tour group had been so very disappointed that the tower behind the dials was under construction. Sheets of green netting draped a scaffolding around the clock, which shrouded everything but the clock dials and 4 eerie sculptures along its top. Rachel hated the sculptures on sight. The eyes of those figures, particularly the skeleton, had seemed to watch her, drilling into her thoughts. It was a ridiculous sensation, like a child's fear of the dark, but one that made her so uncomfortable she had to avert her eyes from the clock. Instead, she watched the shadows of workers underneath the netting, tapping and measuring as they worked. Tonight, that netting was gone. Only the wooden skeleton of scaffolding remained. She'd check the time and then rush to Michael and the hotel. It was only a few streets away. The glee she'd felt when she palmed the USB came back. But for a second, she hesitated before embarking across the open square. Was something different? She glanced at the ornate plague column towering on her right, phallic and sombre in the moonlit haze. She remembered a more modern statue in its place. There were more differences. In the afternoon, thousands of people packed the square. Tourists and school groups, touts and scammers. But now the festival atmosphere was erased. Instead, the only souls clustered around a sad bonfire. They leaned against dilapidated kiosks and tubs of apples and potatoes. Debris littered the area between the structures. An upturned wheelbarrow, a blacksmith's hammer, an iron tub containing the glowing embers of a kiln. So much for Prague being a 24-hour party town like the tour guide had boasted. This place was dead. She continued across the square toward the clock. That afternoon, one worker had come out while Rachel's tour group loitered. A stocky man younger than Rachel, with long blonde hair tied back in a tail. Not her type at all, but, in her boredom, she'd watched him anyway. He caught Rachel staring and touched his fingers to his forehead like a salute. Then he'd raised a bottle of beer, drunk deeply, and walked toward her. She remembered her face growing hot as he approached. When he got right to her, something shiny fell from his pocket and rolled against the heel of her boot. He didn't notice, just kept strolling out of the square, a man getting off a long shift at work. None of her tour group had noticed either, so Rachel had pretended to drop her glove and then picked it up with the item, a 50-crown coin, and snugged it deep into her jeans pocket like a lucky talisman. It was still there now. She was almost close enough to the clock dials to read the time in the moonlight. Behind her, the relentless footsteps drew closer. Rachel risked a glance just as they shot out of the alleyway. The leader carried a lantern, and indignation was apparent in the cloaked men's strides. She breathed easier. The lantern, the cloaks and hats were costumes. The men must belong to one of the city's ghost tours. A fun tour for certain types of people, she supposed. A guide, dressed in medieval garb, toted a lantern while telling his flock of tourists scary tales. This was a tour and nothing more. Nothing to do with her. As she hurried toward the clock tower, she wondered how the cafes around the square hid away their awnings and wicker chairs. Tonight, the colonnades around the square were bare, and the blank doorways of the buildings dead-eyed her like so many skulls. She was almost at the clock when the group of men drew up beside her, pointing, their voices raised. She veered left to get out of their way. This is it, she thought. Despite their clothes, they're not a tour. The tall man sent someone after me. She waited for the formal accusation. She was prepared to send the men to Michael, explain it wasn't her plan to begin with. But then she heard what they were saying. Their voices echoed off the buildings, 1,000 times louder than a crowd. They spoke oddly, but she understood them clearly. "That's him!" one shouted, pointing toward the clock. Rachel saw a man's figure under the scaffolding. "How dare you use my face!" another man screamed. The shadow opened a small door under the clock that Rachel hadn't noticed before. The guide pushed ahead, coming so close to Rachel that she felt the quick, blissful heat of the lantern on her hands. He ignored her. Her shoulders unknotted, They weren't after her. She'd be all right. The clock dials were visible now from where she stood. There were 2 dials, an upper one that told the time and phases of the sun and planets and a lot of other mumbo-jumbo she didn't remember, and a lower one that showed a calendar. But looking at it now, her eyes were again caught by the dreadful life-sized sculptures that decorated the brick next to the dials. The skeleton statue, representing death, bony hand ringing a bell to summon souls. The other statues representing sins, greed, vanity, pleasure. The men reached the tower just as the iron door below the clock slammed shut. They banged on it, their knuckles scraping the metal. When it wouldn't budge, they kicked it, creating hollow clangs that echoed around the square. The hobos attending the bonfire in the middle of the square eased themselves away, receding to shadows themselves. Should she also run? To get to the hotel most directly, she needed to pass the clock. Maybe the men still wouldn't notice her. Cautiously, she edged by them, struck by how beautiful the clock's gilded dials were in the lantern light. The men made so much noise, they were sure to attract the cops. Earlier, Rachel almost hoped to find a police officer to ask directions, but now it would be much more convenient if she wasn't seen by any officials. She was almost safe at the hotel, almost to Michael. A colonnade ran along the near side of the building, providing cover. "Are you looking for me?" A voice out of the shadows made her jump. She stopped. Cold air rushed up her spine as she shrank into her coat. She knew that voice. It had last offered her a glass of absinthe. The tall man. "How did you know?" she started, forcing a note of gaiety into her voice. Her mind spun. She could talk her way out of this. She could. But her voice died in her throat when the man stepped from the shadows into the hazy moonlit street. She was mistaken. It wasn't the tall man. This was the blonde worker with a ponytail she'd seen working on the clock that afternoon. But no, it wasn't him either. Or was it? "Do I know you?" "You saw me this afternoon. Or perhaps I should say, you will have seen me." "That doesn't make any sense." "I'm afraid your hotel isn't open tonight." Oh God, a creepster. Tonight of all nights. "Jackass," she whispered. She began to walk away. "Stop," he called. "I see that you mistrust me. Let me reassure you." She kept walking. "Rachel," he said, "don't leave." She pivoted mid-step, hope warming all the places that had just been cold. "How did you know my name? Did Michael send you? Is he looking for me? I got turned around, but now—" The man laughed. He pushed back the sleeve of his blue canvas coat to show her a large gold watch. Involuntarily, she stepped closer. The watch had many faces all composed into one. The tick of the hands was steady, mesmerizing. Now that she saw the watch, she could hear its movement from where she stood, even with the men shouting at the clock tower door just behind them. "Did Michael give you that?" "It's time. For you," he said, covering the watch back up with his sleeve. "Time for me to what? Take the USB somewhere else?" He pointed behind him, where the men now held burning sticks to the scaffolding. "Time for you to learn what these men have not." Jesus, who had Michael hired? What a wacko. "I gotta get out of here. Somebody will call the police. Those people shouldn't be trying to burn that down. That's a national treasure or some shit." The man laughed. "The clock is in no danger." He snapped his fingers and the men's lantern and burning sticks extinguished. Singed black marks marred the scaffolding, but it stood. "Wow," Rachel said. The men threw the lantern down and one shook the scaffolding instead. The worker extended a hand to Rachel. Habituated by years of office etiquette, she stuck her palm into his. His fingers were warm, but, she realized, hers were almost blue with cold. Where had her gloves gone? Back at the bar? "It's nice to meet you, Rachel," he said, shaking her whole arm with his grip. "I'm the clockmaker." He let go of her hand and the warmth faded. "You want to know the time," the clockmaker said. "It is much, much earlier than you think." "Oh, thank God," she said. "Is Michael still waiting? I'm not too late getting to the hotel."
"Your hotel, as I said, is not open tonight. But I will take you there. First, though, let me explain something about my beloved city."
The clockmaker pointed at the tower. The men now fought amongst themselves. They writhed on the cobblestones, punching each other. Rachel's shoulders felt heavy as she watched, as if the bruises from each blow were coming up on her own skin. One of the men got free and ran back across the square. The others chased him.
"Rachel, on your tour you saw me." She nodded. "While you were learning about the figures that flank the clock."
"Right," Rachel said. "Those are freaky, but honestly—" As if he hadn't heard her, the clockmaker pointed again at the clock.
"The top sculptures are there to remind the populace of their sins. Greed, the man with the money bag, the man who tried to burn it up. He'd make money if we had to build it again."
Rachel wasn't moving her legs, but it seemed like she was getting closer and closer to the clock. The horrible figures grew larger before her.
"And then," the clockmaker said, "the leader admires himself so much he thought I put his face on vanity. He's not happy with the likeness, thinks the eyes aren't right. And this one here, he looks happy, doesn't he?"
The third statue played a stringed instrument. As her vision sharpened, she recognized the statue's likeness to the drunkest man, the one who had thrown the first punch.
"He represents all the earthly pleasures and perils."
Her vision returned to normal, but her neck throbbed. "Cool story. I have got to go."
But Rachel's boots wouldn't move. "And this sculpture," the clockmaker continued. "The fourth one, what do you see?"
The fourth sculpture was the one she most wanted to avoid, the skeleton that rang the bell. Before she answered, the clock's pieces started to move, doors opened, chimes rang out. Goosebumps rose on her arms. "Look, Mr. Clock, whatever, I'm going," she said, but her boots still wouldn't move.
"I want to help you, Rachel," the clockmaker said. "Every day I evaluate the people who stand before the clock. Everyone has within them some of these qualities, like that little group of men. But they don't want to see themselves depicted so truly there, so they don't truly see. They laugh, they joke, and in your era, they take pictures. When they look at the skeleton, they see something that will only come later, a long time from now."
Rachel's eyes fixed on the skeletons. Did the grinning face look familiar?
"Every day I take measure of the souls who come to view the clock. This man is full of greed, that one full of lust," the clockmaker said. "And sometimes I see someone like you, Rachel. A little criminal who could use my help."
The clockmaker was close to her now. When had he stepped nearer? The light from the dying bonfire threw red shadows across them both. "Michael's not waiting, is he?" She had to say it, but she was certain she was too late. He'd hired this weirdo to tell her their plans were cancelled, to scare her. It was working.
"It is time for you to make a choice," the clockmaker said.
"I'm sorry I let Michael down, but this is not my fault. He should have figured out a way—" and I think I can help you." At last, Rachel's boots allowed her to move, so she stepped back. "Listen to my offer." "Okay." She was so close to the payoff, damn it. "There's got to be a way around this. You want to help me try to sell the USB drive? Someone else has got to want it if Michael's first buyer was prepared." "You need to listen." "Fine. What?" "The man you stole from has found you. But with my help, you can have your life back. Your attempt at theft will be unsuccessful, and you'll lose your job." "Well, that's stupid," she said. "I can't lose my job and the payoff money." "Aha," he said. "So tonight's theft must be successful at all costs." Rachel wrinkled her nose. This guy had no idea what was on the line for her. The money, Michael, getting out of her stupid low-responsibility job with her condescending office mates. She wanted to go do stuff that people envied, have people listen to her, upgrade her life, not sit behind a spreadsheet 36.4 hours per week every week until she retired and died of boredom. "Look, I need that cash. You don't have to understand." She started walking. "You're right. The hotel is that way." She heard his footsteps follow her. The hotel's street was as cold and lifeless as the other ones, but had been lit with candles in heavy iron lanterns. As they walked, one by one the candles fizzled out, leaving the street ahead of them in shadow. The icy mist had now descended to street level. The Hotel Orloy was just ahead. This afternoon it had been a handsome green building with a small glass door leading in and an eye-catching neon sign outside. The door had a funny plaster face above it, a horned man adorned in grapes. But now there was no neon sign. There were no glass doors on any of the buildings. Instead, each had iron grates or wooden slabs in the doorframes. None of the shops she remembered were in evidence, nor the glass storefronts she'd browsed just this afternoon, dreaming about what she could get with her half of the money. "It's number 35, she muttered to herself. "Number 35. The clockmaker's footsteps continued behind her. Finally, she spotted a building bearing that same plaster devilish face. "I found the hotel," she said over her shoulder. "You don't need to keep following me." "Are you sure this is your hotel?" he said. "Yes." "Where's the sign?" "It's—" She pointed, but there was nothing there. Just a blank wall. "Out for repairs." "How do you get inside?" "Maybe they don't have 24-hour reception." She jogged to the wall and looked for a keypad. "There'll be a way to swipe my card." "There's nothing." She stopped, her heart in her mouth. The building was just a home. She was standing in front of an ordinary residence, a flower box with dead blooms at the window where this afternoon concert posters had been pasted, a garland of forest leaves on the wooden door instead of the clean glass panes showing the way to reception. It was not her hotel. "What's going on?" she asked in the bravest voice she could muster. "You haven't figured it out yet?" "There's that vanity," he said, "thinking you could pull this off." "But I did. I stole the USB stick." "You haven't noticed there's no people around? You don't hear streetcars, car horns, no one with modern technology. Let me ask you, does your phone work?" "It's out of battery." "Oh, Rachel," he said, "what do you think has happened?" "I think you must have put something in my drink at the bar. Who are you really working for?" It was possible he was still on her side. She wanted to think that. She had 500,000 reasons to hope that. He pulled the coat away from his wristwatch again. This time the timepiece gleamed from an inner light. When he touched it, the mist dissolved, and she saw the glow of LED lights and sensed the hustle of people and heard the thwub-thwub beat of electronic music. She stepped toward the hotel door, but then he touched his watch again, and the mist and the silence returned. Under her coat's hood, she imagined something cold, steely cold, on the tender place where her ear met her neck. Her stomach flopped. She wished she'd never met Michael, never heard about his plan. All she had to do was deliver one tiny USB stick, and then all of that money that they'd already wired to her bank account would double. She believed it all, was counting down the days till she left her old life and disappeared. But then he'd hired this guy and bailed on her. Damn Michael. Did you drug me? And where is Michael? I'd like to talk to him, please. It was better if she remained polite. Who knew what he was capable of? Instead of answering, he asked, "When you saw me this afternoon at the clock tower, do you remember what happened?" "Oh, of course." It was so simple. Why hadn't she remembered? "You dropped something and I picked it up. I should have given it back to you and I didn't." She dug in her pocket for the coin. This would solve it. He'd let her go, take her to a hospital to get the drugs pumped out of her. She held out the coin. "Here." "Oh no," he said. "I expected you to keep that. Thank you." "What?" "It was a test. At the clock I could hear your thoughts and feel your desires. I sensed you would need my help. This proved it." He smiled. "You followed me all day because of a $2 coin." "Day isn't the right word. Do you recall what your tour guide said about the clock? If you paid attention, you would know the clock's figures were installed in the 1600s, and that a group became angry about their installation because they thought it mocked them. They were correct. So, Rachel, welcome to the year 1629. I brought you here primarily to help you understand me and my abilities. However, you may stay in this time if you wish." Rachel stared at him. "I can't go back in time. That's impossible. And even if I could, I wouldn't. What happened to women in the past is awful," she said. "I'm living in the best time we've ever had now." He shrugged. "I brought you here to help you believe. Now, are you ready to make a choice?" Odds were, she'd wake up in a minute in a hospital ward with her stomach being pumped for whatever kind of Euro trash drugs he'd slipped in her absinthe. But for now, She'd better humour him. Please take me somewhere familiar. To my time, my hotel, wherever. As you wish. He walked away, and the lanterns popped and sputtered to life. There was nothing to do but follow. They turned into a passage where she saw people milling in the shadows, but when they passed, there was no one there. At the end of the passage, she sensed light, music. She caught a whiff of diesel fumes and cooking oil and the sharp scent of an over-applied cologne. When they exited, the fog was denser than before, brighter and more real somehow. Her neck and the side of her face hurt. She smelled the acid sweetness of absinthe and felt the dry rasp of its aftertaste on her tongue. Finally, the clockmaker stopped. She knew where they were. Back at the absinthe bar. Did you ever really leave? She frowned. He made no sense, but she had no response. The pain in her neck had gotten worse. It was hard to concentrate. I have a deal for you, he repeated. Fine. What? Your life as you know it is over. You rejected my offer to stay in 1629. A pity. I think you'd flourish. So now you have two choices. One, enter the bar and be caught with the USB drive. You will have failed Michael. You will be fired, prosecuted, and imprisoned. Left with nothing, you will need to work harder than you ever have before. The lingering taste of absinthe brought bile to the back of her throat. Rachel rubbed her hands together. She ached to go inside and warm up. Why would anyone choose that option? She said. He smiled. Or, two, you can enter and escape consequence. The tall man will know of your crime, but cannot harm you further. The clockmaker's smile spread to a grin. In a manner of speaking, you will have succeeded. But either way, I warn you, you will not get your money. You will not get your happy ever after. Are you kidding? Number 2 all the way. Are you certain? You don't have much time. Now you're the one worried about time, Rachel said. I wanted to get to that goddamn hotel to meet Michael in 15 minutes, and you kept... Decide. The surrounding smells intensified, especially the overwhelming scent of spilled absinthe. The tick from the clockmaker's watch grew louder, unbearably so. For the first time in the months since Michael approached her about helping him steal the project data, she felt uneasy. She wanted the reward, the excitement, the knowledge she'd taken something for herself from the company after wasting her life as a drone. If she didn't get the money either way, then she definitely couldn't get caught too. She'd lose her job, lose all credibility, would never find even another boring accounting gig. She'd have to apply at the job centre, hear the whispers of her neighbours when they found out she'd been fired. No, thank you. My choice is to go back and not lose my job. I thought that might be your answer, but I had to be sure. Remember, Rachel, from now on the clock only ticks one way. He touched the watch face again. In time to that maddening ticking, Rachel jerked toward the bar as if cold hands pushed her. She stumbled through the door and down the stairs, entering the hot, close confines of the underground space. After the quiet streets, there was so much noise and so much light. Everyone was screaming at her, voices raucous and unintelligible. And there was that pain behind her ear again. In one last tick of the clockmaker's watch, everything changed. She sprawled on the sticky bar floor, shards of glass on her cheek, absinthe in her hair, and that pain. How long had she been like this? Rachel looked up. The tall man's face loomed over her. She saw the dripping knife in his hand. Moments ago, its blade had punctured her neck. The floor was paved with stone, and oh, so cold. She knew why she recognized the skeleton's smile at the clock. It was her own smile. And it was her own time to go.
The Starlight Mile by David K. Houligard. Performed by Tim Campbell. Colin boarded the train in Cleveland, Ohio, and handed his business class ticket to the car attendant standing just inside the vestibule. Her fingers moved across the top of the glossy paper. "Cincinnati, eh?" the attendant said. "Well, feel free to sit wherever you like, Mr. Gibbard. We're pretty light on this schedule, so we won't be using assigned seating." Colin nodded and took back his ticket stub. "Thank you." He approached a smoked glass door to the right of the attendant. A red light above the door turned green, and the metal frame slid open, tucking itself into a pocket. Inside the car, Colin counted only 8 other passengers, most of which were occupying the seats near the back. He opted to take a seat near the front, putting several empty rows between him and the next closest person. Moments later, the attendant passed through the car. She stopped briefly to chat with each passenger and placed small handwritten cards beside the seat number above their heads. After finishing up at the back of the car, she made her way over to Colin. "Cincinnati, was it?" she said. "Yes." The attendant wrote CIN on a card in black Sharpie and stuck it next to his seat number. "You're not going to get lonely up here all by yourself, are you?" she said. "No, I'm not all that much for socializing," Colin said. "Understood." The attendant winked. "Enjoy your trip, Mr. Gibbard." Not long after she exited the car, the train pulled away from the Cleveland station. Colin tossed his travel bag in the seat in front of him and rifled through its contents, until he found his sketchbook. He flipped the pages to a drawing he'd started several days earlier, a high fantasy scene depicting an armor-clad warrior fending off a dragon's fiery breath with her shield. After brushing away some leftover eraser shavings, he nodded in approval of his work in progress. The sound of the car's pocket door opening and closing barely registered as Colin resumed his work, concentrating on his shading technique. The flooring creaked as someone's heavy footsteps moved toward the front of the car and stopped at Colin's row. "You're quite an artist there, young man," a raspy voice said. Colin looked up from his drawing and politely smiled at an elderly man wearing a pinstriped 3-piece suit. "Very good indeed." "Thanks," Colin said, quickly returning his attention to his work. "Mind if I sit?" the man said. Colin raised his head again and glanced at the empty seats all around him. "Right here?" "Sure. Why not?" the man replied. "But wouldn't you be more comfortable with a row all to yourself?" Colin said. "Comfortable, yes, but this row is closer to the bathroom, and at my age, that's a blessing." The old man plopped down across from Colin and sank into the faux leather seat. "I promise I won't be a bother." Colin's face flushed with heat, but he continued working on his sketch in silence. The old man reclined his seat and removed his fedora, holding it in both hands over his belly. "Ah," he sighed. "Now this is comfort worth the price of a business class upgrade. Wouldn't you agree?" "Yes," Colin answered without lifting his eyes from the page. "Much nicer than the bus, anyway." "The bus?" the old man roared. "I can't imagine taking a trip like this on the bus. Makes my rear end sore just thinking about it." Colin chuckled. "Yeah, it's miserable. I've done it before. At least my company took pity on me and sprung for the train this time." The man's fingers drummed against his fedora. "Pardon an old man's curiosity, but what do you do?" "I'm a graphic designer," Colin said. "A graphic designer?" The man studied Colin's sketch. "You mean you get paid to draw dragons and such? Sounds fascinating." "I wish." Colin blew a puff of air out of his mouth. "This is just for fun. For work, I do boring stuff like designing logos and custom graphics for small businesses. It's good experience, I guess, but I'm really only padding my resume until my dream job comes along." "Which is?" Colin stilled his pencil and looked up. meeting the old man's gaze. "I'm sorry, son," the man said. "I don't mean to be nosy. Back in my day, good old-fashioned conversation is how we passed the time on long train rides. We didn't have all the fancy gadgets you kids have now. But I'll leave you alone." "No, it's fine." Colin sheathed his pencil into his sketchbook spiral binding. "My dream is to become a concept artist for either a movie studio or a video game company. I want to create visuals that resonate with people, you know?" The old man smiled. "I'm Herbert, by the way." "Colin." "Pleased to meet you, Colin," the man said, "and thanks for humoring me." "No problem," Colin said. "Say, do you know any good stories?" Colin furrowed his brow. "Stories?" "Surely a man capable of conjuring fire-breathing dragons from his fingertips must also have some great stories to share." "Not really," Colin said. "It's usually other people's stories that get my creative juices flowing." "I see." Herbert rubbed his chin. "Then may I tell you a story and see if it inspires you?" Colin checked his watch. There was still well over an hour to go before the next station stop in Toledo. "Sure." "Excellent." Herbert put his fedora on and returned his chair to an upright position. "Tell me, Colin, do you like scary stories?" Colin nodded. "Then I think you're going to love this one," Herbert said. "It's a story that originated here in Ohio, on this very route of this very train, as a matter of fact." Colin rolled his eyes. "Please don't tell me that this story ends with a car full of dead passengers and a bloody hook stuck to the outside of the door." Herbert smirked. "No, Colin, nothing like that. This is a story about a tunnel." "A tunnel?" Colin shook his head. "No offense, Herbert, but I'm way too old to be afraid of the dark." "Oh, this isn't just any tunnel," Herbert said. "This is the Starlight Mile, a very mystical and forbidden place." Colin folded his arms across his chest. I've lived in Ohio my whole life, and I've never heard of the Starlight Mile." "Of course you haven't," Herbert said. "You're young, but us old-timers, we know the truth. The truth about a time in Ohio's history that most would rather forget. But I know the tale all too well." "Mm-hmm." "You don't believe me?" Herbert said. Colin shrugged. "Oh, how I love a skeptic," Herbert said. "You want proof, and I will oblige. Close your eyes and count to 30. "How is that going to prove anything?" "Trust me," Herbert said. "Close your eyes and count to 30. If I'm telling you the truth, when you open your eyes you'll see a hill outside the window covered in old stone markers." Colin sighed and closed his eyes. He counted to 30, out loud, opened his eyes and turned his head toward the window. A blur of thick trees flew past. "Okay, I'll admit it, Herbert. You had me going there for a break in the trees gave visibility to a large mound of earth. Rows of decrepit stone markers and moss-covered rocks littered the path to the top. "That's a neat parlor trick. But come on," Colin said. "That doesn't prove anything. You've been riding these rails a long time. You could have worked out that calculation of distance a long time ago." "Not impressed, eh?" Herbert tipped his fedora. "Okay, try this. Recite the Pledge of Allegiance for me." "What?" Colin looked at Herbert cockeyed. "Why?" "You wanted proof, right? I'm offering it to you." Intrigued, Colin cleared his throat and complied. As the last word rolled off his tongue, a cheerful voice came over the PA system. "Good afternoon, folks. This is your car attendant speaking. For all you sightseers on board with us today, if you look out the right-hand side of the car, you'll see the historical remains of an old Ohio ghost town." She made cartoony, ghostly wail sounds. "The town is now closed to the public as local volunteers work to restore it back to its former glory, but we were able to sneak a peek at their progress as we passed by." "Go on," Herbert said, grinning wide. "Have a look." The train sped past a town of crumbling structures, old brick buildings with missing walls, wood cabins with holes in the roof, collapsing in on themselves. A haze of wispy dust hovering midair down every dirt road.
"Amazing, isn't it, Colin?" Herbert said. "It's hard to imagine a time before asphalt streets, steel beams, and supermarkets. Yet somehow people did it."
Colin pressed his forehead to the glass. "But how did you—"
"Are you ready to hear my story now?" Herbert said. "To hear about the Starlight Mile?"
Colin slid back in his chair, elbows firm on the armrests.
"Back in the early days of railroading, there were men aboard every train called brakemen."
Herbert interlocked his fingers over his chest.
"The role still exists today, only their responsibilities have changed. It's safe to be a brakeman now, but back then a man knew he was signing his own death warrant by accepting the position."
"Why was it so dangerous?" Colin said.
"Excellent question. You see, the purpose of a brakeman was to manually apply the brakes to a car and slow the train down, which in those days could only be performed outside the car."
Herbert pretended to pull an imaginary brake in front of him.
"He'd have to brave the elements in order to carry out his responsibilities, which came with extraordinary risk. Brakemen often perished from ailments ranging from pneumonia to beheading and everything in between."
Colin winced. "That's horrible."
"It is, and all true, I'm afraid," Herbert said. "It wasn't uncommon for a brakeman to fall from a train and be sliced to pieces on the tracks. In fact, it happened to every brakeman who passed through the Starlight Mile."
Colin ran his hands through his short cropped hair and examined the moisture on his fingers. "Why?"
"This is where the story gets really good."
Herbert stomped his foot.
"As news of this tragic phenomenon made its way through local towns, much like the ghost town you saw back there, people began to panic. Rumors of witchcraft and curses circulated for miles in every direction, until the superstition ran rampant throughout the state of Ohio. Fear prompted groups of protesters who demanded that the rail company build a new route around the tunnel."
"The company must not have listened if this route still goes through the Starlight Mile today," Colin said.
"Sure they listened, but building a new route would have cost time and money that the company couldn't afford to lose. So instead they did what any enterprising company would do. They raised the brakeman position's wage."
"Seriously?" Colin smacked his forehead. "Their solution was to just throw a few extra bucks at the problem to shut people up? Unreal."
"You have to remember that times were tough back in those days, Colin," Herbert said. "A few extra bucks, as you put it, meant the difference between your family eating or not. When faced with that option, you bet those men took the job, even when the mysterious Starlight Mile deaths continued."
"You're kidding me."
"Oh, make no mistake. The curse of the Starlight Mile was feared by all," Herbert said. "Every brakeman in Ohio hoped and prayed that they'd be the first to survive the trip, but one by one each met the same fate. Inexplicably cast from the back of the train and shred to ribbons under its wheels."
"That's insane," Colin said. "So when did the curse, or whatever it really was, finally stop?"
Herbert cocked his head to the side and scratched his brow. "What makes you think the curse ended?"
Colin laughed. "Well, for starters, because this route still goes through the tunnel and brakemen don't seem to die anymore."
"An astute observation," Herbert said. "You're right. A brakeman hasn't died on this route since modern technology improved the operation of trains."
"See? There you go." Colin brushed his hands together. "No curse, just an unfortunate byproduct of the era."
Herbert smacked his lips and narrowed his eyes. "Do you know why they call it the Starlight Mile, Colin?" he said, his voice now higher-pitched and rumbly.
An icy chill ran up Colin's spine.
"The tunnel runs through a hollowed-out path in the hills, exactly 1 mile long," Herbert said. "Once inside, the train is fully enveloped by darkness. The only trace of light comes from tiny flashes like twinkling stars that no one has ever been able to explain. Can you see 'em, Colin?" Can you see the twinkling stars?
The train entered a tunnel. Pitch-black walls surrounded the car, swallowing every last ounce of light. Colin fumbled for the reading light button above him, but clicking it had no effect.
You see, Colin, even after the trains improved, the pattern of unexplained deaths in the Starlight Mile continued,
Herbert said.
If not a brakeman, then another crew member or passenger took their place, and the method of their demise grew ever more gruesome over time.
Colin mashed the reading light button repeatedly, still to no avail. What's going on with this damn thing?
By the 1940s, stories of the Starlight Mile carried warnings of supernatural forces at play, Herbert said. Some even said that the tunnel had been claimed by the devil himself and turned into his personal playground of misery and despair.
A pungent odor filled Colin's nose. His eyes watered. He gagged on the stench, feeling its vapor snake through his respiratory system and burn his throat. Colin rose from his seat and pounded on the window. Strobes of mysterious light illuminated the car, like a photographer snapping pictures from within the tunnel. In the brief flashes, Herbert's face reflected in the window, his grin widening into an unnatural smile curving toward his temples.
The townspeople believed that the tunnel's sparkling lights were really the collected souls of the brakemen, put on display for the devil's delight, and decorating the Starlight Mile like ornaments of sorrow.
The train rocked and Colin fell back into his chair. He gripped the armrests, his heart pounding in his chest, and the image of Herbert's contorted face frozen in his mind.
But you're right, Herbert said. There is no curse. The tale of the Starlight Mile is nothing more than an urban legend used to scare children before bed. This train will soon exit the tunnel, and the lights will come back on. I'll be gone, but you'll continue onward to Cincinnati. One day you'll even realize your dream and become a concept artist, probably making a fortune off of the artwork you create inspired by my story. That would be nice, wouldn't it, Colin?
A deep growl emanated from the seat across from Colin. A fleshy substance coiled around his ankles and slithered up his shins. He tried to scream, but the thickness in his esophagus muffled the sound.
Then again,
Herbert said. Two piercing red eyes cut through the darkness, holding Colin hostage within its gaze.
I've never been one for happy endings.
Boo. Did we scare you? We hope so. You've been listening to Ghost Stories, created by 11 authors, performed by 11 narrators, produced by Blunder Woman Productions. Pieces featured in Ghost Stories include She is by the Window, written by Anthony Addis, performed by Marnie Penning. The Whimsy, written by Patria Burchard, performed by Rachel Jacobs. Wendigo, written by Molly Coyle and performed by Lauren Ezzo. The House, written by Tanya Eby and performed by Rhett Samuel Price. Geiststrom, written by M.K. Gibson, performed by Kyle Tate. The Clockmaker, written by Beth Green, performed by Daniel Cohen. Mr. Goat, written by Matt Godfrey, and performed by Amy Landon. The Family Ghost, written by Susan Hunter, performed by Holly Palance. Starlight Mile, written by David Hulgrad, and performed by Tim Campbell. Dreams in Black Static, written by Ambrose Ibsen, and performed by Joe Hempel. The Rabbit Hole, written by Jack Soren, performed by Hilary Huber. Production copyright 2019 by Blunder Woman Productions. We hope you've enjoyed listening to these stories. Please give us some stars and share it with a friend.